Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Байрактар. Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Hello, everyone. I am the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1103 of the War News stream. And we started early today because apparently the intro got broken through a glitch. So we are live super early tonight. It's good to see you all once again. And today we have massive news amidst the Sunday night fundraiser stream that Zelensky's apparently rejected a ceasefire proposal with Russia. There was a massive long-range strike on Russian oil facilities, and also Europe unites around Ukraine in a very big move. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we had a major glitch tonight. It appears that although I exported the file successfully, it didn't upload into OBS correctly, and OBS didn't tell me. So we only got about the first part of the intro, and that was a shame because tonight was supposed to be the first night where all of the orchestrated pieces were in the intro. But that is fine, because we have loads of news to cover. We have absolutely significant news from every single corner of the globe, as we've been able to hear of massive explosions all the way in Ufa. The Russian Federation has been surrounded in Toretsk today, and we've even been able to hear inside of the London summit for the European Union that it appears that the entirety of Europe will be continuing to support Ukraine well into the future, although we're not entirely sure about the U.S. standing and position on that at the moment. We've also been able to hear that inside the Middle East, it appears the Israelis are going to be attempting to push further into the area of the Syrian interim government's controlled territory, and we've also heard that firefights have begun in Rafah practically immediately. But tonight is a very special night, as we do have a fundraiser for Nova Ukraine. A fundraiser goal goal of $2,500, and I think we've already gotten to $1,718 on that fundraiser.
Damn,
So
it's going so fast. It's going crazy fast. I'll tell you what, it's going as fast as that intro went at this point, I'm telling you.
oh yeah, hopefully it'll continue to go on higher and higher. But we have significant news today from every single region of Ukraine, and an absolutely significant and massive amount, as we were able to see that within the city of Toretsk, the Russian Federation appears to be completely encircled at this point, because we have been able to see that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to make their way all the way into downtown, and are currently controlling all of the major roadways, except for one that go to the western area of the city. At this point, we are understanding that the Russian Federation within the western regions of the town is effectively surrounded, as the Ukrainians have clear line of sight onto the only remaining road exiting the town of Toretsk, meaning that the Russian Federation was to attempt to withdraw at this point. We would most likely see that they would take significant losses, as the Ukrainian armed forces is able to ensure that although this is technically under Russian Federation control, one of the main roads heading through the central area of Toretsk, that doesn't really mean that they will be doing well in the case of a retreat, as they do once again have clear lines of sight within this area. We've also been able to see some additional maps as well, such as this one, that largely shows a very similar but slightly different frontline situation, but once again showing that the the armed forces of Ukraine have clear line of sight onto the last major road exiting the western region of the city of Toretsk, and possibly an entire brigade-sized unit that's within this western area of the city of Toretsk may be surrounded at this point by Ukrainian armed forces and may not be able to retreat even as of right now. The Russian Federation is presented with several options in this situation. They can either try and doggedly defend the remaining corridor that is left and allow Russian Federation forces to attempt a retreat from that area and into the city of Toretsk itself, or we may be able to see that the Ukrainian armed forces are able to close this slight opening and actually physically control the small gap that exists where the Ukrainian armed forces are not at but can shoot into, and then the Russian Federation will either have to conduct a breakout of their forces within this area of western Toretsk, or those forces will have to completely give up and surrender, or the Russian Federation could attempt a breakthrough from the eastern area of Toretsk, pushing back through the Ukrainian line and trying to reopen a corridor so that way these remaining forces within the western region of the city can be able to conduct an evacuation of their own into safer frontline territory. We've also been able to see a little bit of limited footage from the city of Toretsk today, as the 28th Mechanized Brigade published some footage of the battles that are currently going inside of the city. And we were able to see right here the 28th Brigade bringing in their normal intro, as we can see one of the tanks moving into the city. We can also see largely just a montage of the 28th Brigade's activities. We can also see them shooting down an SU-25. That actually happened around a week and a half ago at this point. We can see the Russians running from building to building, of course being targeted by the 28th Brigade. And here we can see one of the tanks of the 28th Brigade within the more so northwestern area of the town, firing on Russian forces that were trying to take refuge within an industrial building.
Also, by the way, if you're just joining us right now, I see a lot of people asking, what's happening? Why are we already in the news? The intro had a bit of a glitch, so we had to start super early tonight, earlier than usual, because otherwise it would have just been dead space the whole time. So that's why we're on early. I see some people saying, what happened? Why are you starting so early? Trust me, that was a shock for us too. We had to jump straight into it way earlier than expected, so that's why.
And here we can see the Russian Federation continuing to be pounded by the 28th Mechanized Brigade throughout the entirety of the city of Toretsk. This is largely a montage, to be entirely honest, of all of their activities so far, because we've actually seen a good amount of these clips over the past week and a half, while the Ukrainian offensive in the city of Toretsk has been ongoing. We can also see a Ukrainian drone attacking and destroying a Russian Mi-17. We've never actually seen that before. We can also see them hitting another helicopter around the area of Toretsk, also hitting some form of an armored vehicle and forcing the Russians to retreat from the area. We can now see them bringing in some drones and knocking out some infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers that were also around the area as well.
Also, by the way, I've got to mention, we're already over $2,000 raised of the $2,500 goal, which is insane, because it's literally right now the intro would typically be still running, and we're almost about to hit the goal. We've had some crazy, huge donations coming in, so huge shout out to the audience. This is super early for that much raised.
Absolutely crazy. And I got to say a massive shout out to everyone who's been supporting the fundraiser so far, because it appears that the support is massive tonight. Absolutely huge. And we see here the Ukrainians targeting Russian drones. We can also see them targeting Russian forces within some of the small houses on the outskirts of the town of Toretsk. largely leveling the buildings in the process. And we can see them absolutely hammering the Russians. Of course, the 28th Brigade has been a large part of the counteroffensive action within the town of Toretsk, and we can see that they're getting some incredibly good results at this point, especially with the massive amount of losses that the Russian Federation has incurred in the town, and also the loss of vital amounts of ground and city blocks surrounding the central area of the city that's led to a decent amount of the Russian Federation's armed forces being entirely encircled at this point within the western area of the city. That's the end of the clip right there, but a very impressive montage by the 28th Brigade, once again showing us largely what has led up to this point today. And to show y'all a little bit on Google Maps of the city of Toretsk, at least before it was devastated significantly by artillery, the Ukrainian armed forces are currently around this area right here within central Toretsk, somewhere within these built-up buildings. This means that the state of Ukraine does have the ability to look down the major avenue that does head into western Toretsk in this direction. Most of the Russian forces at this point within the western area of the city are somewhere around this slag heap that used to be used quite heavily during the industrial times of the city. Those industrial times are still there, but not in their heyday. They are able to see directly onto that street and fire at it, meaning that Russian forces that attempt to withdraw from the western side of the town are now going to be completely under fire. And that also means that as of today, effectively, they are practically cut off from any kind of Russian supply chains that would have reached the western area of the city of Toretsk. We once again have to make it a little bit clear that we do not know exactly how many Russian forces are within the western area of the city of Toretsk. But one thing we do know is that we have hit the fundraiser goal. Hey!
We hit the goal! Jaga, jaga, Igor! I'm telling you what, literally, I think the intro might be ending like right now during our normal time, which is insane. We're already $132 above the goal, which is insane, by the way. And we've had some massive ones coming through. So, dang, that's nice.
And that is absolutely impressive. A huge shout out to everyone for fundraising that much so far. And hopefully we're able to send this thing on to space well beyond $2.5 thousand, which was the fundraiser goal. But we have been able to hear and once again see, getting back to the battle analysis, that the Russian Federation is going to be in a pretty bad spot, at least as far as the Battle of Toretsk is concerned, and is practically encircled at this point with really no hope of exiting the western area of the city without taking significant losses or without attempting to hold out until they most likely are forced to surrender due to a lack of supplies and munitions. But moving on from that and out of the city of Toretsk, it does appear that there were some major developments inside of the Russian Federation itself today that also were of significant note. Inside of the city of Ufa. Ufa is a pretty good distance away from the state of Ukraine. It is approximately 850 miles away, making this an incredibly long-range target for the Ukrainians to hit. One of the longest-range targets that has been hit in the past by the Ukrainians would be Naberezhny Chelny, or specifically Votkinsk, which is also around 830 miles away. Generally, back during those days, the Ukrainians would use a modified light sport aircraft that carried a 500-kilogram bomb inside of it and nothing but fuel, and would fly the incredibly long 850-mile jaunt into the Russian Federation and then slam it to its target. Those attacks were incredibly successful at the time, and it did appear that for the longest time, it was most likely going to be the go-to way the Ukraine was going to be able to conduct long-range attacks that have been going on so far. But we were able to see in the city of Ufa that it appears that a Russian refinery was hit quite significantly today, and a decent amount of damage was caused, as you can see here in the clip.
That's a lot of damage. That's a deep strike too. That's like super deep. Well, that might be one of their records, isn't it?
Yeah, it is their record at this point, 850 miles. But it is a very impressive hit. The damage has been significant. And from what we understand, a fairly large explosion happened within the central area of the Ufa refinery. And at this moment, it appears that the Ufa refinery has now been forced to go offline due to the serious amount of damage that has been inflicted so far. And we see here them continuing to film the flames coming from the central area of the refinery. And that's the end of the clip, but still very impressive to see. Moving on from that and into another clip that we were able to get, we were also able to see the refinery fire from another angle. It appears to be a little bit closer to the refinery itself. and once again showing that significant damage that was caused by the Ukrainian strike earlier. We also have one last clip inside of UFA, once again showing the damage that was caused by the strike, which we can see right here in a night vision camera. And we can see the explosion and the fire burning. And it appears that it turned into a slideshow towards the last part of this camera's footage, but still very nice to see that the Ukrainians were able to get a significant strike onto the Ufa refinery, and from what we understand, the Ufa refinery produces, from what I was able to find, approximately 220,000 barrels of usable fuel products per day, meaning that another significant 250,000 barrel loss of usable fuel products is being felt by the Russian economy on a day in and day out basis at this point because of the Ukrainian actions against the Russian Federation so far. We have also been able to hear outside of that there's been some major developments inside the diplomatic sphere, outside of the state of Ukraine and inside of Europe, as we were able to hear that the well-awaited Ukrainian conference began today and also concluded today as well. This conference included a large amount of the countries inside the European Union, especially the significant ones militarily and economically, and it appears that there was some very interesting things and developments that came out from these actions that were made today at the diplomatic conference. As we were able to hear that Zelensky said that he will sign the U.S. mineral deal, and his country is ready to do so. We have also been able to see some additional news on top of that, that the Europeans, the British and the French, proposed a 1-month air and naval ceasefire in Ukraine. This is something that we have to point out because some people have made it sound like Zelensky just shot down an outright ceasefire. There was more so a decent deal of misinformation going around about this. Quite honestly, in my opinion, a lot of bullshit going on about it, because a lot of people made it to sound like it was a complete ceasefire, like the fighting would end and people would stop dying. This ceasefire only affects the air and naval situation, and as far as the naval battles are concerned, there's literally none. Ukraine doesn't have a navy, and Russia's Black Sea Fleet has fled to Novorossiysk and rarely ever engages in any kind of actions whatsoever at this point in the conflict. And as far as air attacks are concerned, really the Russians and the Ukrainians are hard in on those, and they are really the only way to actually try and fight and win the war. If the Ukrainians were to agree to a 1-month air and naval ceasefire, they wouldn't be able to inflict the significant kind of damage onto the Russian Federation that is helping them to get an upper hand in the actual part of the war that counts at this point, which is the economic side of the conflict, meaning that we have to cause more economic damage to the Russian Federation than the state of Ukraine is sustaining in exchange. One thing, though, that has also been a little bit interesting is that this will not stop the actual ground conflict in itself. This will just stop the naval and air actions of both sides, but as far as the actual trench fighting on the front lines is going, none of that would stop at all, according to the ceasefire arrangement that was proposed by Britain and France today, largely meaning that this is only a ceasefire in name, and it's not an actual full ceasefire like would be seen in other conflicts where all hostile actions cease at some point. We did hear, however, that apparently the Europeans, specifically the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of France, said that this would be followed by a second phase involving European troop deployments to Ukraine, meaning that there would be European peacekeepers inside of the state of Ukraine. After the initial air and naval ceasefire was agreed to, eventually they would get to a second ceasefire, which would be a complete one, and then they would start to bring in peacekeepers. We already know that the Russian Federation would say no to that. Absolutely. They've already made that incredibly clear in the past, that no one's allowed to send peacekeepers into Ukraine, and no one's allowed to really do anything in support of Ukraine that might possibly jeopardize their own interest within the country. So for this reason, we largely know that that wouldn't have been successful in the first right, and on top of that, that would have only frozen Ukraine's and Russia's most important ways of actually causing significant damage to each other. Really, at this point in the conflict, the only side that's getting significantly damaged from major air attacks actually is the Russian Federation. Ukrainian anti-drone and missile efforts largely have an incredibly high interception rate these days of around 80 to 90%. The Russian Federation has an interception rate, on the other hand, of around 15%, which is the complete opposite, meaning that for every 10 Russian drones that fly into Ukraine, only about one of them, or less than one of them, will make it to its target. Out of all 10 drones that would be launched into Russia, generally 9 out of those 10 actually will make it to their target and hit those locations, meaning that if the state of Ukraine agreed to that ceasefire, now the Russians are pretty much only being protected to that that point from the actual damage of these air attacks, because largely for months at this point, the state of Ukraine's air defense has become robust enough and effective enough to be able to protect itself from any kind of Russian drone and missile attacks that have been conducted so far. So we were able to hear in the long run, Zelensky did reject the naval and air ceasefire idea that was presented by the French and the British, and stated that he would rather not pursue that path at that point for the kind of reasons that I laid out right now. Not only that, but there is a significant battle we were just covering that's going on in the city of Toretsk and Pokrovsk, and the Ukrainians are currently winning those conflicts with the current war situation as a whole. If the Ukrainians were to start changing that war situation, for example, the Russian Federation was possibly able to have more usable fuel products on hand and available, that may free up enough Russian finance for them to somehow be able to scrape up enough money to refurbish enough armored personnel carriers or tanks that those infantry forces could be supported with heavier fire within those regions. So for the large part, we really don't want to see a naval and air ceasefire, if that's the only kind of ceasefire there would be, because it wouldn't be incredibly effective, and really in the strategic sense, it would really only be benefiting the Russian Federation over that 1 month long naval and air ceasefire, at least in terms of the air campaign that's currently being conducted right now. We were also able to hear that Zelensky did state that he is ready to step down if it guarantees peace and if Ukraine gets NATO membership. So Zelensky did make it incredibly clear today in the European Summit, and also to an interview to Sky News, which you can find online. We cannot show y'all because that would be copyrighted. We were able to hear Zelensky clearly state that if the state of Ukraine is guaranteed peace and NATO membership, Zelensky would step down effective immediately. He would actually resign on the spot, which is a fairly bold move, because once again, it is showing that largely Zelensky is more so looking out for the interests of the state of Ukraine than his interests as a career politician. So for that reason, he's largely trying to show to everyone in the Western world that they are once again trying to look out for the best interests of the citizenry of the state of Ukraine, and not just the personal interests of, say, Zelensky or some sort of Ukrainian oligarch out there, wherever they might be. But beyond that, we do hear a lot of people talking about the massive strike that occurred in the city of Ufa. And it does appear that a lot of people are saying that it looks like a new Ukrainian weapon was used, or it may have been a long-range drone. Really, it seems like everyone's kind of down the middle on this one. But Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So it looks like 39% of the audience said yes, it probably is a new Ukrainian weapon in use, because that was a very, very far deep strike. And once again, that could be a new weapon. While 35% said no, it's probably just a long-range drone of some sort that Ukraine had in their arsenal. And 12% said there's a 50-50 chance on this one of it being a new weapon. And really, it's hard to tell. Ukraine has unveiled a lot of new weaponry here in the last couple of weeks. And of course, all those weapons appear to be more long-range focused weapons. So this could be one of the first uses of maybe the Peklo missile. That could be one of them, or some type of new weaponry of some sort. So I'm actually going to be with the 40%. I think it was something new, because once again, this is one of the furthest strikes we've seen in recent, actually months, of an oil refinery deep inside of Russia. So that was a hell of a strike. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that, in my opinion, I believe it was most likely a long-range drone. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense probably would have been fairly adamant about making the statement that that was one of the cheap Ukrainian long-range missiles if it was used, and I'm not entirely sure if that cruise missile has that kind of range. I believe it only has about a 500-mile range, so this was most likely one of the light sport aircraft modifications that they've used in the past that was used to be able to conduct this long-range strike, because that's usually been the go-to for these kinds of strikes so far. And we've also seen that strikes such as Izhevsk and Naberezhny Chelny have been conducted with similar drones and have been able to get similar results to the one that we saw at the Ufa refinery. So for that reason, I largely do believe it was probably just a normal Ukrainian long-range drone and nothing incredibly out of the ordinary. But moving on from that, and out of that bit of news, we do have to sit here and continue to talk a little bit more about what has been going on inside the European Summit. Generally, one thing that was interesting to get out today is that Europe is still incredibly clear that their support is behind Ukraine, and continuing the war, in their opinion, is well within their interest, at least for now, beyond the limited ceasefire proposal that was brought up by the French and the British today to the state of Ukraine. This is also something that is a little bit more interesting, is that we really didn't see the French try and jump on the independent sphere of influence move like we thought they would by this Sunday. That was a little bit shocking, and I don't really know where to go with that at this point, but it does appear, at least for now, that the Russian Federation might be able to count on the Western sphere remaining a homogenous bulk, at least at this moment governmentally, although there are clear fractures of some sort of a split that may happen here in the the coming future, possibly within the next few months or maybe the next few years at this point, but it didn't really happen today. That is something that I would have to say is a little interesting, at least to me, because you would think that the Europeans would be pretty apt to try and look out for their own security interests, especially considering that many of them have said that the United States isn't looking out for them. Nevertheless, they are trying to find some way to support Ukraine, but also stay within an American framework where they may or may not, according to their own statements, will be able to protect themselves on into the future. So it's a little bit of an interesting thing with that. But nevertheless, a lot of people are talking about the ceasefire arrangement or idea that was brought up today by the French and the British. And it appears that Ukraine did reject it, and a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts on it. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So once again, the United States have been proposing a ceasefire when the very fiery meeting happened over here in the United States. When the U.S. president and Zelensky met, the ceasefire was something being discussed. And once again, Zelensky rejected that right to the face of the U.S. officials. So now France and Britain has also proposed a 1-month ceasefire, which seems to be a little bit less drastic than what the U.S. was proposing. And Ukraine has outright rejected that proposal as well. So what are your thoughts? It looks like 56% said Ukraine should reject it at all costs, while 23% said Ukraine should at least entertain it, and 15% said it seems like a really tough call. And this honestly, I will say this one is a bit of a tough call because I was not expecting France and Britain to really propose this today. That was sort of unexpected. And it sounds like they're trying to maybe try to appease the U.S. a little bit, but they haven't gone all the way by saying, let's make this a long-term ceasefire. They're just wanting a 1-month ceasefire, which seems like basically trying to sort of placate the position of the United States, because a 1-month ceasefire in reality won't change much of anything. So I would say that Ukraine probably should reject it at all costs, but it's a tough one, though, because once again, that could piss off France and Britain in addition to the United States. So it's getting a little bit hairy here on this one, and only time's going to tell. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it would not be within the interest of Ukraine to accept a 1-month-long air and naval ceasefire. Once again, this is not a complete ceasefire, so if you're ignorant and cannot read, that does not mean that there is a halt to the actual fighting on the ground. Everyone will be dying, and the exact same numbers that they have been dying for months. So there's going to be really no change to that at all. The only change is going to be that the state of Ukraine will not have to have a massive amount of anti-aircraft units constantly shooting down practically 90% of all incoming Russian drones and missiles that they have been able to get up to at this point in terms of interception numbers. But on the meantime, the Russian Federation wouldn't be hammered and pounded in terms of the Ukrainian air attacks that we've been seeing over the past months that have been causing significant damage to the Russian war industry, as well as the Russian oil industry as well, which has been incredibly important to keeping the war going. For this reason, a naval and air ceasefire really only benefits the Russians if that kind of a ceasefire was arranged and agreed upon, because the state of Ukraine isn't really being affected that heavily by air attacks. It's largely the Russian Federation instead. So the ceasefire would only be benefiting the Russians on the home front and allowing them time to be able to try and repair their facilities and at least get them up to some operational ability that might be able to see the Russian economy survive several months longer if the war continued on at the end of that ceasefire completely like it did at the start and just went on into its conclusion, which will most likely lead to a Russian economic defeat. So with that in mind, I don't really know why the ceasefire was that good of an idea or even proposed. And not only that, it's only a month long. And once again, it's only a month long, and it doesn't actually guarantee an end to the war. It only guarantees to buy the Russians time on the domestic home front, and then the war gets right back to it in about a month's time. It doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I would be entirely honest, it didn't really make that much sense, and it doesn't really benefit both sides mutually. It only really benefits the Russian side the most. And on top of that, a naval ceasefire is pretty much pointless because there is no naval action going on. Like, that's just how it is.
Do you think that a month of time would give Russia enough time to rebuild a ton of equipment, or would it be, basically, because once again, it's only 4 weeks. So Russia has been trying to catch up with rebuilding their equipment stocks. That's why they're using the donkeys, because they're out of equipment. But, even with the 4 weeks, I do agree. It would only really hurt Ukraine. It wouldn't really help them, and it would probably maybe help Russia. But is that really enough time to rebuild enough stocks to be meaningful in any way?
It's not really about stocks. It's more so about repairing their refineries, which they would have time and ability to do, especially if the United States, during that month-long ceasefire, somehow lifted sanctions against the Russian Federation that have stopped the importation to Russia of specific kinds of oil refining components. We could see that the Russian Federation is able to stock up in that time of those components, And not only that, repair the currently damaged refineries and get them back up and running, meaning that for a short while before the ceasefire would end, the Russian Federation would be able to start working on restocking their vital fuel supplies so they could keep the war going that way. That's one of the biggest issues that is affecting the Russian Federation, is that they do not have enough vehicles, and not only that, they hardly have enough fuel to even keep the remaining vehicles running. So with that in mind, if the Russians are allowed to pretty much try and build up some sort of civilian vehicle stock, or better yet, try and restore their fuel supplies and fuel production, that means that this is only benefiting the Russian Federation, and Ukraine's not really getting any benefit out of it at all. And then on top of that, the only way that Ukraine really, for the large part, over the majority of the war, has actually been able to pretty much shoot right at the Achilles heel of the Russians, which is their oil industry and their war industry back on the home front. The only thing at that point that's going on is the actual ground battle, which the Russians are able to start stabilizing their situation behind the lines, such as the availability of vehicles and also the availability of fuel supplies. It's pretty easy to say that maybe some Ukrainian offensives that are going on right now, like in Toretsk and Pokrovsk, could be reversed and completely stopped, or eventually the Russians might be able to try and pick up some momentum again and start pushing back towards Pokrovsk and back into Toretsk again, which would start to jeopardize the Ukrainian situation that we're seeing right now. And on top of that, it wouldn't even really make that much sense to agree to a ceasefire and start changing the current situation that we're seeing in the conflict, because for once in months, we are seeing that the Ukrainians are actually making successful offensive maneuvers, for example, in Toretsk, and also pushing the Russians back from Pokrovsk. So changing the situation in any way, shape, or form may start to augment the actual battlefield situation on the ground that we're seeing like those, and we may see that the Ukrainians are not that successful on the battlefield because the Russians' logistical and support lines are a little bit more robust, or a little bit more capable, or not in absolute jeopardy of collapsing at any moment due to some kind of mismanagement. So
I just don't see personally. I get why Europe, specifically Britain and France, are trying to push for a ceasefire, because I'm pretty sure they're trying to placate the United States. That's probably the reason why they're doing that. But ultimately, though, what's the objective after that month-long period's over? Because I think they're going to clearly go back to fighting. Like, I don't think that 4 weeks is going to be time to make a deal for peace, because Russia doesn't really want peace and Ukraine's not willing to give up their land. So that 4 weeks is going to be purely go time for rebuilding stocks, also, trying to repair equipment and things like that, and repair these refineries. So it's just basically a pause. So that way, after the month-long period ends, the fighting even gets more intense, which would not be in the interest of anybody except for maybe Russia at that point, because they've had a chance to rebuild. So I don't really see any plan behind this. I'm not really sure why Britain and France would really push this on the public, because, placating the United States, while that may, gain some favor from the United States, that's not going to help Ukraine at all.
I would say it probably wouldn't help Ukraine one bit. I don't really know what the point of the ceasefire would be. And also, on top of that, once again, once the month ends, everything goes back to the way it was. I mean, the ground fighting didn't even stop or slow at that point at all during that entire month, which is really the most important part of the fight, because it's not like the wars being fought out on the open sea. This isn't the Pirates of the Caribbean. This is almost World War I at this point. So really the most important kind of a ceasefire that could be had, if there was any, would be a complete stop to the ground conflict instead of the air and naval conflict. Really, a complete ceasefire would be the best solution to that. But a limited ceasefire like that achieves nothing for really the Ukrainians. It only benefits the Russians. And then on top of that, it actually doesn't stop the ground fighting at all. So once that 1 month ceasefire is done, that really only affects the drone strikes that both sides are conducting on each other. They're right back to conducting drone strikes. The Russians will be in a slightly better position than they were a month ago, and then the war just keeps going on indefinitely, because the Russians are never going to agree to the step 2 of the ceasefire, which, let me make sure to get you all that step 2 of the ceasefire here, which is, it will be followed by a second phase, which would be a permanent ceasefire of all types. So it would be a complete ceasefire involving European troop deployments to Ukraine. In essence, peacekeepers into Ukraine. And Russia has made it incredibly clear that even if these peacekeepers were under a non-NATO mission and not representing NATO with Article 5 protections, they don't even want any peacekeepers inside of Ukraine, because that would jeopardize their ability to be able to invade Ukraine a second time in the future. So they want absolutely no peacekeepers. So that means that the second ceasefire, the actual permanent one, the real ceasefire for the large part, would never be agreed on. It would only be the first last one that might be agreed on, and the only reason the Russians would agree to it is because they would be able to start limitedly repairing and trying to rebuild a little bit of their oil infrastructure that has been absolutely slammed at this point in the conflict. So it just really doesn't make that much sense. So I would largely say that I understand why the ceasefire was rejected. If they want to come up with a complete ceasefire and also immediately deploy peacekeeping troops in Ukraine at that moment and somehow get the Russians to agree to that, I would say that that's not that bad. That would end the conflict quite literally dead in the water. It would never restart again. But with this kind of a ceasefire, it's really only like a thoughts and prayers kind of a ceasefire. It doesn't really achieve anything, rather than the fact it's virtue signaling to say that some kind of a ceasefire of some type was attempted, although that would never be successful in the long run with the kind of plan they're looking at.
Well, I guess the good news is when Europe proposed a ceasefire, when France and Britain both said that we maybe should push for a ceasefire in Ukraine, it wasn't like followed up by statements and threats toward Ukraine like either you do this or we're out. Europe does not appear to be very hung up on the ceasefire idea. They proposed it, and that appears to be the end of it. If Ukraine rejected it, that's it. And it sounds like Europe's going to keep funding Ukraine all the way, even after the rejection of the ceasefire proposal, which is a good thing because the U.S. proposed a ceasefire, and then Ukraine rejected it. And then they said, okay, then we're just going to have to be out then because unless you're going to do it our way, that's it, which is, I don't find that very fair, but that's the way the U.S. decided to play the issue. So at least Europe's not taking that route.
Yeah, at least Europe isn't taking that route. At least it's a good bit more fair in level-headed in an approach than the United States. But still, the ceasefire proposition wasn't even a good one, to be entirely honest. I would also say, I'll be entirely honest, I'd also say that I'm not incredibly happy with the Europeans today and the actions that they made, because I want to once again remind you all of the statements that were made leading up to this conference and then the results of the conference. A lot of European countries are saying we might not be able to count on the United States to be here in the future, specifically the French. So this is more so directed at Macron. He says the United States might not be here, the United States might withdraw, so Europe needs to be more bold and be more willing to take risks and be more ambitious and look out for its own interests and its own security. And then we actually get to the conference today, and really none of that's brought up or even acted on. It was just pretty much statements to make them. And then we just move on into, why don't we try a half-ass ceasefire and also just try and keep everything status quo and leave it for what it is, although we've been saying for the entire week and a half that this diplomatic situation is going on, that the Europeans are left wide open if they're counting on the United States for security, so we need to count on ourselves instead. And then they don't even really work towards counting on themselves. They really just kind of try to placate the situation and just kind of move it on down the line. So I don't really know what's going on with that. That was a little bit disappointing in a way. Honestly, it's good in a way because it will ensure that the Western sphere is still one large homogenous piece, which for American interests is good. But based off of the European interest and European statements that have been made over the past week and a half, it doesn't really make any sense because it's literally working against their own interests that they stated were very evident over the last week and a half. So I don't really know what was up with that. A little bit interesting nevertheless. But one thing that is also really interesting is the situation that's going on down in the Middle East, and specifically a situation that more so was going on for the large part inside of Moscow today. And this is one that we have never really seen before. This is actually a bit of a shock to everyone today, but something that should be addressed a little bit nevertheless. The Israelis are actually bringing a diplomatic conference, military secretary, to the Russian Federation, and he'll be holding a series of meetings in Moscow on security issues and strengthening cooperation, and Israeli authorities are trying to study their relations with Russia. In short, to explain what's going on with this, the Israelis are attempting to conduct a land grab in southwestern Syria. That's really the best way I can put it, because there's really no good explanation for it. They just said, this is the Israeli governmental statement in a nutshell. We don't trust the Syrian interim government, so they not good, we don't like them, so we take more land. That was literally what it ended up coming down to. And so they're now saying that they're going to be expanding into the remainder of southwestern Syria, south of Damascus, and just indefinitely occupy it, much like they did to Golan Heights. Of course, this has caused a bit of some concerns and issues, but the major concerns and issues that have been stated so far are by the NATO member, the Republic of Turkey. And the Republic of Turkey has made it fairly clear that they view any kind of aggressive actions against the Syrian interim government to be violating their sovereignty, and for that reason, they have stated that they would conduct armed action in support of the Syrian interim government to stop such actions from happening. So what it appears that the Israelis are doing now is that they're trying to to heat up the age-old hatred in between the Russians and the Turks that has quite literally historically existed for hundreds of years, to see if they can somehow get the Russians to back up the Israelis against a NATO member, so that way they can continue an offensive inside of southern Syria to hold more ground and then just occupy it indefinitely like they did the Golan Heights, according to the claims that they made right now. It's a little bit wild to hear something like that, because I've never really heard, because of course Israel has largely operated within Western American interest, but for the Israelis to then try and see about the cozying up with the Russians to see if they can strong arm the Turks, which, by the way, are not the best NATO ally at all, they're probably the worst, but still they're a NATO member nevertheless, to try and strong arm a NATO member so that way the Israelis can continue on what they're doing inside southwestern Syria, is a little bit bizarre to me. I've never actually heard of anything like that before being done inside the region. Generally, in the past, the Israelis have not had that great of a relation with the Soviet Union or the modern-day Russian Federation, because the modern-day Russian Federation supported the Assad regime, if anyone remembers that, and the Assad regime wasn't really that friendly to the Israelis. The Russians have also supported the Iranians, which, of course, support Hezbollah and Hamas, and also on top of that, the Soviet Union was the main arms provider to pretty much the entire Arabic world, which went to war with the Israelis countless times over decades. A lot of people have been talking about the Israeli action that was largely made today with the military secretary arriving in Moscow, and from what we're hearing, a lot of people are believing that this is a significant and grave mistake by the Israelis to try and cozy up with the Russian Federation, which historically has been their enemy the entire time that Israel has existed, to try and strong arm the Turks, which are a NATO ally. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So after we've apparently gotten word, at least from one or two sources, that apparently an Israeli military official has visited Moscow, and now we're hearing reports that Israel wants to work with Russia in some way or another to curb Turkish influence over Syria. What are your thoughts? 70% said Israel's making a big mistake in geopolitics, while 11% said Israel's making a smart move, and 9% said this honestly seems like bollocks as a story as a whole. And right now, it sounds like this actually has merit behind it, because it sounds like it was corroborated that an Israeli official did visit Moscow, which indicates they're trying to widen ties with Russia for some reason. And I think Israel's playing this solely in their interest right now, which obviously it's kind of a weird thing to link up with Russia, considering that Russia just got done committing atrocities inside of Syria, and now Israel's going to try to at least open talks with them or something like that. Seems a little bit strange to me. I would say that I'm going to have to wait for more information on this to see exactly where this is going to go. Once again, there are other reasons why Israel could be talking to Russia. It could be for the hostage reasons that are currently being held by the Hamas terrorists. That could be one reason they're talking to Moscow. But I think there may be other reasons like curbing Turkish influence, and that could lead to a really bad problem in Syria, which is, of course, are just recovering from a very, very brutal regime that just got taken out of that territory. So it's just interesting times all the way around in geopolitics, I must admit. But Enforcer, what say you?
And also, before I even address this, I see some people trying to make the argument that Israel is trying to stop terrorists from being along their border. Let me make this a little bit clear. I have nothing wrong with Israel. In fact, we've been supporting Israel the entire time this channel has existed, because they've been fighting Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, which are enemies of the United States and enemies of Israel. But there is no way to make that argument against Syria. Let me explain. There's this area of northern Israel right here, and you'll always notice on the maps that there's these little weird dotted lines that exist within this area that Israel controls, and that's because that's not Israel, that's actually Syria, and Israel has occupied this area for so long, most people think it's a part of Israel, but legally it's still a part of Syria. This is more so a military occupation that the Israelis have been conducting for around 50 years in this place called the Golan Heights. If you ever go back and look at any map of what the arguments about whether it should be Palestine or Israel is, this area was never included because this area was always assumed to be a part of Syria. And so to say that the Syrian interim government might possibly build up terrorists along the Israeli border, that's not even true, because the Golan Heights is around a good 20 miles deep, meaning that even if the Syrian interim government somehow supported a terrorist group directly along this area, they're still 20 miles away from what's technically actually legally Israel. The other thing is that there's an actual neutral zone or a demilitarized zone that existed between Syria and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights that's existed since the end of the Yom Kippur War, or the actual battles of the Golan Heights in the mid-70s, which is about a mile deep in practically every single area and would ensure that there is just no way for someone to start shooting right into your checkpoint because they're going to be about a good mile away when they do it. So with that in mind, it's a little bit hard to make the argument that they're trying to protect Israelis because these people aren't even really technically Israelis. They're actually Syrians that are living within Israeli-occupied territory. Like, you can't make that argument literally anywhere else but the Golan Heights. And so the idea of continuing to expand deeper into Syria to protect the Israeli people, it's a pretty tough argument to make, because technically there's no Israeli people in threat, at least directly along the Syrian border. They're Druze people that are legally supposed to be a part of Syria. That's why the Syria has a dotted line instead of a solid line as the border, because this is a contested border, because this is a military occupation that's been going on for about 50 years. So
I don't understand really what the Israelis are really doing right now, because the new government inside of Syria, the new interim government, at first it seems like they might have been leaning pro-Western, and now I'll admit it seems like the government is leaning sort of toward the Russian side, honestly, at this point, which is kind of weird for the interim government, because they just got rid of the guy who was aligned with Russia that was conducting atrocities inside of Syria on the civilians. So kind of a weird situation on that. But now that they're kind of aligning back the Russian sphere a little bit, and now Israel wants to link up with Russia, who's the one who's apparently getting cozied up with a new government in Syria. That in itself makes no sense to me. It's like, why would they be doing it? That's why personally, I'm going to wait for more information on the story, because it seems like something is not quite right here. And I would have to see it to believe it if Israel actually chummed up with Russia over this issue, because first of all, it doesn't make sense. And number two, it's just kind of hard to believe overall.
Yeah, I would have to say it's a little bit of a weird one. But beyond that, we were able to hear that the Druze people today have begun a national army. And also, by the way, just to say this, I'm not at all really a fan of the Syrian interim government either, to be entirely honest. I'm not a fan of the idea of the Israelis just pushing deeper into Syria and pretty much permanently occupying it, kind of like they've done the Golan Heights. But the Syrian interim government is not an angel. It actually appears that they're going really, honestly, right back into the pocket of being Iranian aligned. Because we've now heard that Jelani, who is the leader, pretty much the de facto leader of the interim government, has now begun the plan to outlaw non-Sunnis from ever being the president of Syria again, meaning that there's not just going to be some sort of a Islamic emirate put into place. This is largely going to be some sort of a fanatical religious regime that is put in place by the Jelani government. And a lot of people said that that was going to happen, and it now appears that that's quite obvious that that's going to be happening, because to ban an entire group of people from ever running for the president, not because they're a non-citizen of the country, but because they don't have the proper religious beliefs inside of the country, is certainly showing us that they're moving down the route of religious repression, most likely against the Shiite sect of the Islamic faith, which also means that they're probably going to start conducting reprisals and also other actions against the Christian communities near to the city of Homs, and also the most likely, let me think, what in the world's the name? The Kurdish people of northeastern Syria. So it doesn't really appear that the Syrian interim government is doing all that well, but at the same time, considering that the Syrian interim government is still fairly weak and is not even well formed at this point, it does appear that some people are making sure to protect their own interest, and it looks like the region's going to be going right back into the conflict again, because now we're seeing that the Druze in Suwaida in Syria, which I'll show y'all where that is, that's actually around right here. That's Suwaida. So that's largely where the Druze people live, is pretty much everywhere east of the Golan Heights and south of Damascus. They're now creating a new national army to protect themselves from what might become, well, what is most likely going to become a religious fanatical government led by Jelani and the Tahrir al-Sham, I believe is the name of it. But here's the clip right here. Well, you see them rallying. It doesn't really appear that they ever gave their weapons over to the interim government either, which is a little bit important to note as well.
Have you seen the AI pictures of like Netanyahu being photoshopped on the Druze flag right here? Like he's like dressed up in like the garb and everything like that. He's like sitting in front of the flag. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that actually.
I'll have to like get that image and show you. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see it. But we can see them driving through with some brand new Toyotas. So apparently they have been able to find at least some new Toyotas somewhere.
And honestly, like I just don't think there will ever be peace in the Middle East. It's just like once one thing like topples, everybody was like, "Oh, look, like Bashar is out of there. He's gone now." The Middle East, or at least in Syria, will sort of stabilize a little bit, hopefully, and maybe we'll have some hope in the new government. And now it's turning into a shit show again this quick. It seems like there's never just going to be an end to the fighting in here. I wish that there was an end to it, but it just seems like it's just going to be a perpetual thing.
Yeah, it doesn't ever look like it's going to end. And I'll tell you all why it will not end. It's because of the religious fanatics inside of the Middle East that continue to try and impose their specific sect on everyone else, which just would never work. I mean, it will not. Like even if they wanted it to, it's not going to work because there is a load of different groups of people, cultures, and religions that exist throughout the entirety of the Middle East. And yet, time and time again, they continue to try and impose one particular belief on everyone. In Iraq, it was that way under Saddam Hussein. Inside of Saudi Arabia, it's been done successfully because the Saudis, as a culture, were largely a nomadic group of people until the foundation of Saudi Arabia with the, of course, the, I guess you could say the spontaneous creation of oil in the region in the 30s. They finally started to settle into actual settlements, and that's when the Saudi royal family really came into being then as an actual established power, and they also saw that pretty much the entire region already fell largely under some form of the same Islamic sect. So for that reason, they really didn't have to worry all that much about having to try and create some sort of benevolent governance. However, in Syria and Iraq, it's fairly different. Because of how their borders were drawn up, really it's actually quite different for literally every single country from Israel to Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, as well as Kuwait, because all of these were a part of the mandates that were made at the end of World War I. And let me go see if I can show you all the British and French mandates. And let me see if I can find a map of that real quick. So here we go. This is a map of pretty much the modern day Middle East right here. But this shows y'all what was under British control and what was under French control. Syria and Lebanon were brought under French control at the end of World War I. And before this, this entire area was a part of the Ottoman Empire. And so at the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire literally just imploded and collapsed, there was a great deal of people who were concerned in the world that there would be an endless amount of chaos and strife if the area was left on its own. And that was largely true because there was already a lot of chaos just going on in Turkey alone. So what the British and the French did is that they ratified a treaty that created these mandates. The mandates were never supposed to be a permanent colony. They were more so supposed to just be under British and French legal jurisdiction until the British and the French could somehow create a government by 1949 in all of these countries that will work, and then send them on their way into the open world and hope that things would work out for the best. The problem is that in these regions, there's a great deal of different cultures and religions. And because of that, you largely need an incredibly benevolent government. And a lot of people don't get this. A lot of people always blame the British and the French for creating these nations' borders as they exist, and then saying that that's the problem for strife in the region. But I'd largely have to disagree, because I'm fairly certain that the United States of America has a significant amount of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and quite literally every ethnicity imaginable under the sun, and somehow it's largely worked for 248 years, of course with, the major outliers, but for largely the last 50 years at a minimum, it's largely worked out incredibly well, and you haven't seen the one specific race of people or religion of people have come into power in the United States and said that these people are going to have a great run of things while everyone else is going to be put down. That largely hasn't happened in the last 50 years. However, in the Middle East, it largely worked. At least the nation building that they did back then, that the British and French did, largely worked until the advent of the mid-70s and the rise of Islamic extremism within the region, and a couple of other major historical events that we'll kind of just cut down really quickly, for time reasons. After all of that happened, a lot of these countries started to go into extremism themselves, and every single sect of Islam, of which there's really only two major ones, there's the Sunnis and the Shiites, largely want to try and impose their form of religious extremism on everyone else, and act like they are the preferred class of people, or the preferred religion of people. So Christians within the region are oppressed. Anyone who's not within that specific Islamic sect is oppressed. Really, everyone is oppressed. It is not exactly what could be called an Arabic person of that specific Islamic sect. If you're not one of those people, you're not going to be preferred status inside of those countries. And that's why we've seen that there's been a great deal of problems and issues, because it now seems that Jelani is coming out with the exact same kind of ideology that has pretty much plunged the region into endless conflict since the mid-70s, and is trying to make it work again. The Kurds will never agree to it, and the Syrian Democratic Forces within northeastern Syria, they're never going to agree to it. The Christian majorities around the city of Homs Muslims are never going to agree to that. So that area is most likely going to probably turn into a free city or go into revolt. And then also the Druze people are not going to agree to it either, and they're already forming a national army. So pretty much the entire, quote unquote, master statesman, Jelani, is already collapsing the entire country because he's trying to bring forward a religious extremist government that clearly has never worked so far in the region. And it would have made a lot more sense for Syria to have had a government that would have respected religious differences and ethnic differences and largely just said that each region will start to separate from each other inside of Syria, and there will be a strong federal government, but each region can make laws and customs that are more so specific to their kinds of cultures and ethnic groups of people with the cultures that they have, instead of trying to impose something blanket statement across the board. That's just how you create conflict.
I wonder what happened, because at first it seemed promising a little bit. I wasn't totally convinced about it, I'll admit, but it seemed promising than usual that maybe it was going to go somewhat good in Syria to the best extent it could in Syria. But I don't know if the power went to the guy's head, or maybe he had this planned all along and sort of kept it silent while he was sort of taking power over Syria. But whatever the case is, he's gone the wrong direction, obviously. And from this point forward, it could get even worse, because if he's already leaning this way, apparently he really, really wants to go that way, and he's just going to slowly over time give in more to it, and then more as more pressure gets laid on him. But what do you think the deal was? Was the power going to his head, or was he planning this the whole time?
I think he might have been planning this the whole time, because remember, the HTS is a successor to Al Qaeda. But the thing about that is that, believe it or not, folks, this is actually something interesting. I've actually looked a bit into the history of Al Qaeda and other kinds of groups like that, because it's very important to understand their motivations in the region. The HTS was a successor to Al Qaeda, and what a lot of people don't know is that before Osama bin Laden got absolutely smacked by the U.S. Navy SEALs, he was actually trying to recreate Al Qaeda into kind of a new, more marketable form. So he's actually trying to change all of the beliefs and ideologies to be a little bit more hip and a lot more tolerant with the times, so that way they could get more followers. And the HTS was one of those groups that ended up splintering off after the death of Osama bin Laden and really the collapse of any kind of centralized control of Al Qaeda. And they were one of those groups that were supposed to be, at least in theory, more marketable to the public, because they were going to be a lot more liberal or lax in the kind of ideals that they were trying to push forward. And that's why, going into this, I said, if anything, in the worst case scenario, they would create an Islamic Emirate, because according to all of their public statements, that largely would be what they were working towards, because that's pretty much what all of the evolutionary cells of Al Qaeda that splintered off were going to turn into. Of course, not saying that they were great at that point. They were still, of course, terrorist forces. But at the same time, they were supposed to be a lot more lenient than Al Qaeda, to an extreme, really, compared to what Al Qaeda originally was. So the fact that they went after that, and now Jelani, who is pretty much has been the leader of this sect since it was created, is now going to actually bring forward the exact kind of radical extremist Islamic government that we would have seen Al Qaeda bring into being if they had a choice when they actually existed under Osama bin Laden. That's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's actually crazy to see something like that. And it is showing us that largely any of these groups, even if they try and make it sound like they're going to be somewhat neutrally aligned, they're most likely going to try and bring forward another radical extremist faction of government, much like they always have in the region since they started to pop up in the mid-70s. And also, by the way, they started to pop up in the mid-70s when the entire situation with the Shah was happening in Iran, and Persia was about to fall due to the popular revolt that happened in Iran that created the Islamic Republic of Iran. So with all that in mind, this seems to just be a carry-on of that, and it looks like, because of that, they're also trying to move right back into the pocket of being with the Iranians. So we'll have to see how all of that goes, but at this point, I would largely say that the United States of America needs to consider the Syrian interim government to be an unfriendly power within the region that most likely will try and align itself with one of our adversaries, the Islamic Republic of Iran or the Russian Federation. And so at this point, we shouldn't start going to bombing them directly, but we should try and extend one more chance to them to try and turn into an emirate at worst, or we will start going in and possibly try to, in my opinion, change the government into something a lot more benevolent that the majority of Syria won't be ecstatic with, but they'll at least be somewhat okay with. But still, it just doesn't look like it's going to be doing well, and it does look like it'll create more instability. But on the other hand, I don't believe that gives the Israelis justification to continue to expand their control of southwestern Syria. I just don't see that. This is still legally, according to everyone in the world. That's why you see the border is shaped that way. Syrian land. So while the Syrian interim government is messed up to hell and back, and I really do think the United States should start looking at them as an adversary and enemy of the United States, I don't think that's a good justification for the Israelis to pretty much occupy indefinitely more Syrian lands and bring these people under Israeli control. Because another thing that I'm not entirely sure on, but I believe is true, is that I don't believe any of the people living within the Golan Heights, if I'm correct, get any representation inside of the Israeli government, because they're technically not full-on Israeli citizens. They are some sort of people living within an occupied area, so they don't really get any representation. So extending that even further into Syria, it doesn't really make that much sense to me, because we're just...
And also, by the way, Israel's got to be careful, because you got to remember, ISIS is still lurking around this area. Like the ISIS sleeper cells are still inside of Syria and still in the region. So if you get the Druze fighting, you get all these different factions inside of Syria fighting with one another, and they're all tied up. That gives ISIS a perfect chance to pop right back up and start fighting with them as well, which could get very out of hand quickly, because I believe that's a pretty powerful cell that's still there, that is currently not very vocal, because once again, this new Syrian government appears to be taking charge of it. But if the fighting gets out of hand and Turkey's interest and Israel's interest start fighting in Syria, that could be a real shit show. And I don't think Israel's really considering that fully.
I would say that's something that the Israelis really aren't considering fully either. But once again, we in the West are never supposed to be supporting pretty much ground invasions of a country unless if it's in a very rare circumstance. For example, they're attempting nuclearization. There's very seldom reasons that we should justify ground invasions of foreign countries, and for that reason, I'm largely against the Israelis pushing into Syria and trying to take more of southwestern Syria, because beyond the impact of Israel controlling more land, there really is nothing to come out of that would be beneficial to anyone, rather than the fact that Israeli forces control more ground within the region. And then also another thing, for people who are arguing that they're trying to protect Israeli people. Okay, so let me ask you all this, because this is the part where I'm not really getting a lot of sense from it. So these people in the Golan Heights aren't even Israelis. They're Druze people who are technically Syrians, but now the Israelis are going to count them as Israeli people because they've been living under Israeli occupation for 50 years. So when the Israelis take all of southwestern Syria, including As-Sawaida, and then in another 20 years, the Syrian situation is still unstable, what are we going to see then? Or are we going to support and justify an Israeli ground invasion and occupation of Damascus indefinitely because there's more terrorists building up along the Israeli, demilitarized zone at that point in Syria? I mean, where does that end? Because if you continue to justify that kind of stuff, there really is no end, because every single time the Israelis stop their push and then create a new demilitarized zone, then you just use the exact same justification that they're building up terrorist forces along the Israeli DMZ. Let's push even further out to protect more of our people, and then you just continue to absorb more people, claim they're your people, and then just keep the cycle going over and over and over. So where would the end in that be? And that's kind of like the United States saying we need to take care of the cartels in Mexico, so let's invade and occupy militarily northern Mexico, and then we just keep pushing south until we make it all the way to Mexico City and then beyond. That would be the exact same kind of premise there. But beyond that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. But before we move on into the remainder of the news that we have tonight, which there is a significant amount of, I do want to make sure that we address the top donors of the night, because the fundraiser has done absolutely incredible. And it has been huge. We've gotten up to $6.5 thousand raised for Nova Ukraine.
Holy cow.
Unbelievable fundraiser. And we haven't even had time to recognize or shout out any of those top donors. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So that fundraiser has gone crazy tonight, by the way. Like, the goal was actually somewhat low tonight, but it's gone 2 or 3 times higher than the goal, which is crazy. Also, huge shout out to the LSA for making that happen as well. I had a feeling that today was going to be a big one, and it certainly has turned out to be a very big one. But jumping into our top donors of the night, we had a massive $1,000 donation from JMP Traveler, who threw that in earlier on. And sadly, JMP, we would have called that literally instantly earlier. Sadly, though, though we were a little bit off kilter because of the intro glitch, so we missed it in the beginning. But huge shout out for that massive support to the fundraiser. And also, by the way, we also had a 1,000 from Anonymous as well, but sadly the name did not pop up next to it. So if someone put that in and wanted to get credit for it, let me know and I'll recall it out. But huge shout out to JMP and Anonymous for each throwing in $1,000 support. Also, big shout out to Hal Rose for throwing in a $333 support, and huge shout out to Hal. And also huge shout out to Andrew Barbro for throwing in a $250, along with Peace with War for throwing in a $200 as well. And thank you all very much for that generosity to the fundraiser. We also have a $150 from Shirley at $145, as well as a $100 donation from the Enforcer, as well as Old Warrior, Autocross 101, David Dornblazer, as well as Just Chillin' and Snow White. Then we had a 100 from BC BCR, as well as David Tarsi, Catherine F, BC Skyman, and also RN87 Mom 94. Also, while I try to catch my breath there for a second, our next one goes to Jay Bagwell, who put in a $50 donation, along with Nightmare Before Christmas, as well as Heather Fitzgibbon, Bill Blake, to Captain Ted, Gloria Dean Donato, as well as Gino Riley, Marin Dukistan, as well as Skip Tracer 007, as well as a 50 from Deb Miller, Vic Fazio, Larry Steinbach, as well as Greg Carrier, Mike Smith, Taros I'm going to butcher the last name, Taros, I'm sorry, but it's Panchasak, or Shock, I think. I'm butchering it, but thank you very much, Taros. Also, huge shout out to Barry Woodward, who threw in a 50, as well as Joe's RV Home Turtle, who also threw in a $50 donation as well. And once again, I got to say, on my behalf and the Enforcers' behalf, huge thank you to everybody that's donated tonight, because it's gone berserk on the fundraiser. And we're very impressed and proud to see that once again. And the LSA has come through for Ukraine and helping to support the civilians and the citizens who are the victims of the war. We appreciate that very much. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to give a massive shout out also to the Seattle Thunder, who just threw in a 50 right there, to all of y'all who have thrown in massive support tonight, and everyone who's thrown in support at all, whether it's huge or not. Y'all are the reason why this fundraiser has been able to get up to a whopping $6.7 thousand at this point, and we are massively appreciative and thankful of y'all, and knowing that the Lee Spring Army will continue to support Western and American interests wherever they exist around the globe, and will continue to support Ukraine, because whether or not people want to think it, it is within American interests to support the state of Ukraine and to be able to continue to put our adversaries into a corner. But I gotta say, absolutely impressive, and a big shout out to Edo Kaluski, who threw in a 100, and Nerdo, who also threw in 100 as well to the fundraiser, getting us on up to a whopping $6.9 thousand at this point. Absolutely,
I think
crazy.
we're going to 7,500 tonight by the stream time being over. I think it's going to be up to 7,500 at least. It's going strong even this far into the stream.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. I got to say a huge congratulations to all of y'all, because y'all make the LSA what it is. I absolutely hate that a glitch happened with the intro tonight, to be entirely honest with y'all. It really threw me off kilter, because I literally just saw the screen go black, and I was like, well, that's not supposed to be black for longer than like a second, so what's going on with that? And then all of a sudden, like, the intro literally just, like the file was corrupted. I don't know how the file got corrupted, because it was literally made like 40 minutes before we went on air, and then it was uploaded about 20 minutes before we went on air, and I checked it, and it was perfectly fine before the stream, because, you know, I slide all the way through it and back to make sure that the whole thing runs smoothly. And then when we actually ran it on the stream, the intro didn't run. So that threw us completely off kilter at the start, because there was only like 2 minutes of prep, and then we had to go live immediately without really any wait or any time to prepare ourselves or any time to say hello to any of y'all. So with that in mind, big apology for that tonight. That was a major technical overlook right there. But also another thing that was a little bit unfortunate about that is that I actually put in all of our actual orchestrated music tonight. So instead of it being the drafts, it was going to be the actual orchestrated versions of Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, the White and Gold, and the Star Spangled Banner. And y'all didn't get to hear any of them because the file was corrupted literally once Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean started, and the rest of it just didn't even exist. So y'all didn't even get to see it, which was a shame, because I was hoping that y'all would really love to hear that tonight, especially considering that it was a Sunday night fundraiser. But also a massive shout out to Ken Larson, who threw in a 100. Hey! And absolutely incredible. But before we move on into the rest of the news that we have tonight, I want to make sure that we get a couple of questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so getting to our questions real quick while I type like a fiend over here. Let me type that real quick and send it. So our first question of the night is going to go to AF Kaplan, who said, given recent events between Ukraine and the U.S., do you think this could accelerate Ukraine being accepted into the EU?
I don't really know. I'll be entirely honest. The resolve of the Europeans was a lot weaker than they were saying today. They were saying a lot of things and really didn't do many of them rather than just supporting Ukraine, which was something that, honestly, I'll be honest with y'all, our diplomatic analysis is getting a little bit tough these days because in the United States, we don't know what the hell anyone's doing. And now, apparently, in Europe, unlike throughout most of the war, they will say a lot and then only really follow through on about 30% of it. So it's getting really hard to try and figure out what's going on these days in the world. But beyond that, I think that eventually the Ukrainians will get into the European Union, if anything. But beyond that, it's really hard to tell because the Europeans could promise the world and then give crumbs. That might be the way it ends up working these days because it doesn't really seem like anyone follows through on what they actually say. And that's something that I know a lot of people are going to say, well, duh, that's obviously the case. But for those people, you don't understand. I've been doing this for 3 years, and usually what people say is what they do. There really isn't that much of a difference from it. Or if they're saying something and it really is outlandish, they'll say we're considering it. Like the French saying we'll consider deployments of French troops into Ukraine if the war goes really badly for Ukraine. Obviously, everyone knows that he's just saying that because he said he was considering it, but nowadays European countries will say, we need to be on our own. The United States can't be trusted. We're going to be on our own. And then they all call an emergency summit on Sunday, which was today, and then they all get together and go, nah, you know what? I don't even remember saying that, but more support for Ukraine. It's like, well, you just forgot 60% of what you were saying leading up to this, and then didn't follow through on any of it. So I suppose it is what it is. But another thing that I have to say is that once again, I also want to throw this out there because I'm not going to say here and act like anyone's without fault. If European leaders want to yap like that and say that they're in massive jeopardy and risk and threat because the United States isn't looking out for them and taking care of them, and then they say all that and say that we have to look out for our own interest and we need to do that right now, and then they won't make any steps towards that, in the future, if they somehow remain within the Western sphere and the situation actually was true what they claim, and for some reason the Russians win the war in Ukraine and then they start invading the Baltics, the Europeans cannot complain at that point on a government level because all of their governments sat there and had the chance to look out for their own interests as they claimed they should, and then they didn't. So, who knows what will go on with that, but that was something that was a little bit annoying, especially for us, because, it used to be that you could take a statement and run with it, and now, because of the new president of the United States, it honestly seems like everything started there. You can't really take anything that anyone says with a grain of salt, because it could be the complete opposite the next day. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, and with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, the fundraiser just crossed the $7,000 mark, by the way, and it's still going strong, even this far into the stream. I got to tell you what, I love to see it. I love to see it. I'll tell you what. Also, by the way, I saw someone come in here a minute ago. They attacked America and said it was a crappy country, blah, 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 and attacked us, too, for being Americans. I got to say, I said this to them in the chat, and I'll repeat it out loud, too. I'm a proud American. I will always be a proud American. This is our home. And even if we make mistakes, I will never be not proud to be an American. And I will say that out loud and proudly all day long. I will never start hating the country simply because bad foreign policy decisions are being made. We've had bad foreign policy in the past, and nobody's ever had the need to start hating the country as a whole. So we're not going to start doing that now. And also, we're not going to have that vile, profane hatred in the chat either. So just a word to the people that hate the United States. We're not going to have that now, and we've never had that. But anyways, jumping into our next one here, this one goes to JMP Travelers, who says, have we heard anything about North Korea?
We haven't really heard a lot about North Korea recently. It's actually been incredibly quiet coming from the Korean Peninsula. Not really a lot's been going on since the whole Yoon Suk Yeol thing got put down in South Korea, and since the North Koreans sent their military support. It still is going on. It's just that no one really says a lot about it. So to be entirely honest, the Korean Peninsula has quieted down a good bit for now. And it looks like at least the kind of wild things that we were seeing for a little bit, or it almost looked like the Korean Peninsula was about to go to war, it's pretty much completely subsided at this point. It probably will be a stable situation until something starts to pick up again, and we'll have a pretty good ability to know when it starts picking up, because like the last time, it took about an entire year for the situation to build up to the point where we saw they were almost going to blow. So at this point, unfortunately, we don't have any real new news about North Korea at this point, beyond they're continuing to provide support to the Russians, but that's pretty much a daily thing at this point. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and also thank you so much once again for that massive support to the fundraiser tonight. JMP Traveler. That was a massive amount, huge amount, still makes up a large part of the fundraiser total tonight. And folks like you helped to make sure the Lee Spring Army continues to support American and Western interests around the globe. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
All right, so this one goes to David Koger, who says, has the U.S. formally or publicly broke the Budapest Memorandum?
Well, I mean, you could say that we broke the Budapest Memorandum like 3 years ago at this point. So yes, I mean, like, but it's largely been the same thing for 3 years at this point, because it stated that if Ukraine was attacked ever, that the United States, Britain, and Russia would militarily come to their aid. You know, not just in giving them bullets, but also actually being there defending them. But no one did. The British didn't, the United States didn't, and the Russians invaded them. So practically everyone broke the Budapest Memorandum. So yes, that's not something that just happened. That's something that's happened for years at this point. Really, honestly, it happened back in 2014, to be entirely honest, when the Russians annexed Crimea. But you know, that's splitting hairs. Really, just for all we're concerned, it was really broken 3 years ago. But honestly, it was broken about 11 years ago at this point. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And also, Matthew, was that the last question of the segment?
Yes, that was the third one.
All right, and so we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news that we have tonight. And we still have a pretty interesting amount of it, mind you, as well. And moving on into the Kursk region, we have been able to see that Russian forces were slammed by Ukrainian drone forces in the area today. Take a look at that. Ole mole!
Giving them the slammy.
Yeah, absolutely greasing them. Look at that.
Oh, man, I tell you what, these Ukrainians are greasing these Russians like they're greasing the palms. I'll tell you what, they gotta keep them greased up, you know what I mean?
These Ukrainians are greasing those Russians like Diddy greased those steps. They were real slippery.
No Diddy.
No Diddy. And we see them continuing to hit the Russians. We can also see the little control room that their drone has on its display.
No Diddy. A through S, but not T.
I've been seeing a lot of people in the chat tonight saying F the United States and F the EU. I just want to make it clear, we're not here for people from the village with low IQ. Like, I'm just going to say that, I know that a lot of people think that that's in vogue because you've got stupid people in the government who have no sense or hardly any IQ, and they say all kinds of stupid stuff. But that's not for this channel. Like, if you're one of those people, you can just go shout that on Twitter for free. But we don't support that kind of stuff here on the channel. And also, I don't support the slandering of allies, and I don't support the slandering of the United States. So if you have those kinds of statements, that's a ban. Anyways, moving on.
What's up with that, by the way? Like, what's up with the modern need to start just going off the deep end or something like that when somebody does something? I hope these folks, like the specific people saying that in the live chat, surely you don't deal with people like that in your personal life. Like, if someone makes a minor mistake, then you're just like, screw that person. I hope bad things happen to them. It's like, surely you don't act like that in your personal life. Hopefully not. Because it's like, also on a geopolitical level, we're stuck with the people we got. So getting crazy and going off the deep end is not helping anything. That just makes your point look really invalid because you're not even approaching it from a logical perspective. You're going completely emotional.
Like, I just gotta say, just to make this clear, we do not support or endorse drug-induced outbursts on our show. So if you're going to act like you have no ability to control your mental impulses and you just have to scream the most heinous shit about the United States and the European Union, you're not welcome here. You're really not welcome if you do that on anything. I mean, to be entirely honest, the only time I get it is when people say screw the Russians because, they've killed hundreds of thousands of people. But beyond that, if you do that just out of the blue, you look like you're mentally unwell. So anyways, moving on from that and into our next bits of Location Unknown news, we did get to see these Max Pros of the 57th right here, and just look at them. I mean, really impressive right there.
Man, I tell you what, I love these things right here. This is America in full form right here. I love them.
Man, I'm telling you what, man, it's so American. It makes me feel like some of the small groups of people who are Americans that come here in the chat. I gotta have an outburst, bitch. But anyways, nice to see. We love to see it. And moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see this M1150 assault breacher vehicle, which is built onto the chassis of an Abrams and also uses an Abrams turret without the gun. That's what's missing on that. You're like, hey, that looks like a burger without the bun, and you're right. That's pretty much like a burger without the bun. It's an Abrams without a gun. But these are incredibly cool vehicles. They're very neat when you see them in practice. They're pretty much like an engineer's demolition vehicle on the battlefield. It can take some pretty decent hits, but on the back of this thing, it has 2 Mikliks on the back of the turret, so it can actually fire off mine-clearing charges on the back of the turret, and not only that, it can be equipped with other things to help out with the engineering role as well. So moving on from that and into our next clip, our last bit of the location unknowns, we did get to see the Russian casualty report, and
Oh my God! Look at that! Look at that! Look! We have record numbers in all categories tonight. 7,000 plus in the fundraiser and 5 Bobcats. I tell you, I love to see it. This is Miss Disa said 5 special equipment is a nice increase over recent days. I asked Miss Disa yesterday. I said, "Can you cook the books for us here on these numbers because we need some Bobcat losses." It came on a Sunday. I love to see it.
Man, I gotta tell you, man, it's nice to see. And Miss EC, keeper of the record, stated that 192 drones is the 3rd highest daily loss, 2 MLRSs and 3 anti-aircraft systems are higher than average, and 5 special equipment is a nice increase over recent days. And I have to agree, a nice increase, without a doubt. But beyond that, we were able to see that 1,110 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 25 APCs, 117 supply trucks, 8 main battle tanks, 51 artillery pieces, 192 drones, 2 MLRSs, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and 5 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, it was a pretty impressive thing to see, and we are really happy to see that the Russian Federation is continuing to take decent losses while my esophagus almost collapsed. Moving on from that, we also got to see the Ukrainians hitting the Russians in Kharkiv.
Oh man, I'll tell you what. And while Miss D's is out here cooking the books, the Ukrainians are cooking these tanks, cooking these buildings.
This is the new Dr. Seuss rhyme. I be hitting Russians in Kharkiv like I be slashing cars with car keys.
Damn,
I don't know.
Damn.
Fill in the rest. Like, come up with your own.
Man, call the Ukrainians Vincent because they get in that van and go.
Man, I'm telling you, man, that was deep.
That was deep right there. I can come up with some more. Give me about a year and I'll come up with a few extra.
Call Zelensky an artist the way he asks for that Monet.
hey, that's a good one. I like that. Was that really on the spot?
Yeah, that was literally on the spot right there.
Damn, that was actually pretty good, solid there. That was good as the Vincent Van and Go one.
Oh man.
I'm thinking hard right now about some more.
Yeah, I'm really raking my brain. That's why I'm laughing. I'm like, honestly, I don't think I could top that one. I think that was just like a 10 out of 10 off the gate, and that's it.
Man, call those Ukrainians Napoleon because they'd be picking the Russians Bonaparte.
Okay, that was a pretty good one. That was a pretty.
That was pretty solid right there, wasn't it? That was some good wordplay on that one.
Man, I'm telling you, man. Oh man. Oh man.
I'll tell you what, getting all creative, Matt the poet.
And here we can see the Ukrainians flying a drone through the woods. By the way, I saw a really funny comment to one of our tweets on Twitter, if any of y'all are interested. It said something about us being beta boys, and I found that very interesting because suggesting that one is a beta means that they're below someone else. And as I recall, the only person that was below me was their mother, so I would assume that I'm not a beta. So that was an interesting one to me, a bit of a logical fallacy nonetheless. I also don't get how people act like they can say that kind of stuff to people on the internet, because it's like, I don't know if you know this, but if you said that to me in my face in real life, hands would be flying. It's like I'm not some kind of a weakling or anything like that. It's like, you pissed me off, you're asking for it. You know, it's like that's just rude. It's like, I don't go around calling people betas or loudmouth bitches who think like that. You know, it's like, I don't go around doing that because I would expect that they probably start throwing hands. You know, it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, down into the areas of Pokrovsk, we were able to see the Ukrainian counteroffensive down here was going fairly successful, and we were able to see that the Russians were getting hit pretty good. And we see the Ukrainians coming in and clearing house. Call Zelensky a home decorator the way the Ukrainian army clears house.
Well, I thought the home decorator was supposed to fill house.
Well, that's getting into the details. We don't do that here on the channel.
And what you mean? We get into the details 24/7. The rabbit holes are plentiful.
Only on trains. Only on trains and other things. And also someone said what a beta mill is. I know what a beta mill is because I'm not like ignorant to that thing. Like I know all of them. Let's see here. The snowflakes, the soy boys, the betas. All the political insults from all sides. I generally know them. And then there's the compliments. Based, Chad, red pilled, blue pilled, all that stuff. Like I know all of them. And so like hearing them, like whenever I hear other people use them though, I'm like, that is just so cringe. It's like, oh, you really own me there. It's like, what? It's like, do I have a pacifier now or something? Am I like in a pram? I mean, like, what was the point of saying that? It didn't really achieve anything here. Joel Gilliam said Sigma. Yeah.
Oh, Sigma male. That's the ultimate. That's there's different levels here. Sigma male. That's Andrew Tate with no chin line.
Yeah, that's Andrew Tate bald with his cockeye, and no chin line, taking pictures wearing sunglasses that way you don't see the fact that his eyes are, looking both ways.
Man, Andrew Tate is so rich he only has money to his name.
Oh man, dude,
that was deep there.
That was deep. But anyways, nice to see the 225th doing their work out there on the battlefield. And moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see them hitting some Russian forces down here in the 109th. And we see them here flying on down. And it looks like an Amazon Prime delivery, same day shipping.
Let's see. The viewers are getting in on this poetry. Nicholas Condor said, "Call the Ukrainians janitors because they clean house and take out the garbage." Honestly, I'll give that one an A for effort right there on that one. That was a good one.
Call the Ukrainians nannies, the way they put you to sleep and tuck you in. Like it's or something. I don't know.
That's dark.
Well, I mean, it's true, isn't it? I mean, look at them. They're doing it right there.
Man, did you see? Wait a minute. Did you see that? That car that right there that was distracted by the drone nearly ran his buddy over. I think he might have actually almost ran him over.
I think he may have. Yeah, we didn't get to see it, sadly.
That goofball was looking behind him at the drone and just got him to flatten his buddy right in front of the car.
Oh, and look at that. They got him. White wolf woman said, "Yeah, I agree. I have friends from around the world, and the hatred towards Ukraine and Zelensky is insane. Honestly, the hatred towards anything these days is insane. I mean, there's just so many raving idiots on the internet. Like, you can't ever just not really care for something. You have to hate it to the point that you want to take extreme and illegal actions to deal with it. Like people who don't like the last president or the current president say some of the most heinous shit I've ever seen. I mean, this is unbelievable. And the same thing's done for people who don't like Russia or hate Ukraine. It's the same thing. It's just extremes across the board for everyone. And it's you can I don't know if people get this, but it doesn't really make them sound smart or rational. It actually makes them look to me like they're insane and irrational people whenever they do that.
Let's see. Someone said in the live chat here, what are the odds that the White House is bullying Zelensky or is just a brutal negotiating tactic to get a better minerals deal? I don't know. It could be. I don't know. Honestly, I'm done predicting the actions here. It's impossible to really predict. There's not much open logic being made behind the decision. So when logic is thrown to the wind, it's hard to make anything predictable.
Yeah, it's a wild thing. Also, by the way, we got to see some Chinese mercenaries in Seladovi. when you drink the potion of finger pointing, and it's infinite finger pointing.
Over that way.
Dude, he's just spamming the over there, like thing on the keyboard. It's just like they're over there, and it looks like they're writing in Mandarin on the walls. I'm sure some of y'all are like, "Do you know what that means?" Unfortunately, I cannot read Mandarin well, so no. Like I can hardly read it at all.
And who are these guys fighting for again?
They're fighting for the Russians.
Interesting. So they showed up, the Chinese mercenaries. It's kind of interesting.
They showed up, like the Chinese fighters call it kung fu. The Chinese fighters, but anyways.
Oh my god!
You now you know what I'm getting at. But anyways,
yes.
Anyways, you get to see the Muramasa unit targeting and taking out more Russians in the south.
Value Radar said if Kilroy was here was in Mandarin, LOL. Maybe so. I mean, that looked like a long sentence just to say Kilroy was here. I think they were writing the whole epilogue about stuff on the wall, so
Dude,
not really sure.
They said, in the great times of our Emperor Xi, in the year of our Emperor 2025, like that's what they were writing on that wall, man. It was nothing short.
Writing some of that Juche on the wall. Although that's the North Koreans. Backspace. That's the wrong.
Man,
people.
They're putting some of that Maoism up on the wall. They're putting those
Maoism.
Maoist quotes. Let me go get some quotes from the Little Red Book, and we'll read off some. Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. So let's see if we. Sadly, I can't put it on screen yet. Wow, he didn't really write a lot, did he? That's a very small book to have, like, for it to be so important in China. Okay, here we go. So I went to some crappy-looking website. Looks terrible. So I'm assuming that this must be from, I don't even know when. But beyond that, it says, on the actual description of the website, we have compiled quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong in order to help the broad masses learn Mao Zedong's thought more effectively. So I'm assuming that this is some sort of a commie website. But beyond that, we will take a gander at it. So, the class and class struggle. In class society, everyone lives as members of a particular class, and every kind of thinking, without exception, is stamped with the brand of a class. Wow.
I thought communism was supposed to be classless.
But this is in class society, Matty. This is about classes and class struggle, that basic Marxist thought. You know what I mean?
Oh, so they're trying to teach them what they don't want to be then.
I'm not going to lie, dude. Like, this is literally like the grass is made of grass kind of a statement right here. You know, it's like, yeah, I think everyone kind of already knows that. You know, it's like...
Oh, man. Mal thought he was cooking with that one.
In the final analysis, national struggle is a matter of class struggle. Oh, well, this gets racial.
Whoa,
so I can't
they get a
even
little
read that.
racist
Like,
right here. Oh my God. Man, that's hardcore racist. Damn.
The enemy will not perish of himself. Neither the Chinese reactionaries or the aggressive forces of U.S. imperialism in China will step down from the stage of history of their own accord. Well, that's usually what happens. Like, if someone's there, they're there. Like, they don't leave. This is like basic stuff.
Read the next one. Read the next one.
A revolutionary is not a dinner party or writing an essay. Oh, I've actually heard this one before. Or painting a picture or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolutionary is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another.
So that doesn't sound good whatsoever there, I must say.
There's some quote in the Little Red Book that almost amounts to something like, just because the rich look like a little puppy doesn't mean you shouldn't crush their head under your boot or something. It was like some sick thing. It was like, wow, that's just like a sick way of looking at it. But also, like, this kind of stuff is stupid. It's like, if this is supposed to be deep, it's like, a revolution is not a dinner party. It's like, well, no shit. It's an armed insurrection. It's like, duh. I mean, obviously it wouldn't, like, most of the stuff is just dumb. Like, the whole entire Red Book is full of dumb stuff.
Wait, there's the dumbest one right there in the middle. It says, we should support whatever the enemy opposes and oppose whatever the enemy supports. Damn, that's some Mao right there. That Mao, he was cooking. Let him stop cooking.
The imperialists and domestic reactionaries will certainly not take their defeat lying down, and they will struggle to the last ditch. It's like, isn't that what everyone does in a conflict, like a civil war or any kind of a war? They fight till the last man until they really can't keep going on. It's like this guy is like, I'm like, honestly, this almost is like the writings of like some sort of an edgy teen who just learned this stuff and thinks that he's really like got it. And it's like, come on, this is like the basic stuff. Anyone would know this. Like, you could ask one of those people who comes in and is like prone to drug-induced outbursts, you know, bitch, and then they would say the exact same things, and they didn't have to act like some sort of a revolutionary master or something like that. I mean, like, this is just a little bit goofy. But
it sounds like they were trying to hit the word limit or something. Like, this is like what you do in like a university class. They said, write on this topic, but you have to have some amount of words in your essay. This is what you'd come up with, is goofy stuff like this.
Let's see. Wait, what? Without socialization of agriculture. Oh, that didn't work. That didn't work. I already know what happened with that. That didn't work. Let's see. I like none of this, like, you read it and it's just stupid stuff. Like, it's almost like slogans, or it's stuff that you ought to, like, you would know. You know, like we must have faith first that the peasant masses are ready to advance step by step along the road of socialism under the leadership of the party. It's like, isn't like the basis of any kind of governance is at least having some sort of faith of the public? Like, even if it's a dictatorship, you still have to have a bit of faith from the populace that you're doing right. It's like, this kind of stuff is like the basics of governance and administration. And then Mao comes along, he's like, wow, look, I just learned all this. You know, it's like, dude, anyone would know this. Like, you could go and ask someone in high school these days if they would know something like this, and they'd say, yeah. Like it just makes sense. But anyways, the book, the little red book from Chairman Mao, in short, is stupid. I just got put on China's #1 hit list. I actually just got put over that guy who ran Baofeng, and also that guy who ran Abu Hassan. Yeah, Jack Ma. I just got put on the list above all of them. The Chinese are going to come, and they're going to inject me with the commie, and then I'll be on here speaking the Maoist revolutionary ideologies. But anyways, moving on from that, we did get to see the Ukrainians hitting more Russian forces in Nestoryanka in the Zaporizhia Oblast.
And of course, we have the traditional commie block here, and it's not holding up good.
It's getting leveled. Or as Mao would say, a building requires a big bomb to bring it down. And then they quote that for like 70 years. Thanks, Mao Zedong. Either way you say that, that's goofy. It's like Zedong or Zetong. Like the
Zedong.
tongue or the dong. Like, it's like, which one is it?
Mao Zedong.
Dude, when Mao was in college, they were like, why do they call you that? He was like, because I'm Mao and I'm bringing Zedong. And then I was like, ah! Like,
he said, they call me Mao Zedong because when you tap on my head, it goes ding, ding, ding. It's like there's nothing in there.
Let's see here. And Kevin Borg just threw in a 250 to the fundraiser right on time. Hey, we just reached 7,264.
We're about to hit 7,500. It's going to happen.
Look at that. Would you look at that? Meanwhile, in Robotny, we've been able to see them hitting some Russian forces in the Ronin unit as well. Also, someone said he was called Mao Zedong. It really just depends. Like, it can be Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong. I use Mao Zedong because I don't have to make the joke every time I say his name at that point. But I used to say Mao Zedong, and everyone used to go, oh, you said dong. And then I was like, you know what? That is actually kind of funny that's one of the ways you can say his name. So I was like, I'll just say Mao Zedong. And we can see them continuing to hit Russian vehicles down here. The Ronin unit is doing a great job. Oh, wow. And we can see them hitting a lot of... That's a whole lot of something right there.
Hitting a whole lot of. They're looking for, they're cruising for a bruising. They're looking for something.
Mao would say about that, cruising for a bruising is something that the lower classes must do to ensure that they are able to continue to fight the bourgeoisie, or something like that. It's
Mao was heralded for his intellect, not.
Yeah, if y'all ever read the opposite of that, which is the one that the Mustache Man wrote, it's also filled with goofy epithets like that as well. It's like, Germany would be better on its own. We don't need to trade with anyone. And then it's like, no, you really kind of need to, and that probably won't turn out that well. And then it's like, well, how will you do that? And then he goes on to explain, we'll just simply conquer the Soviet Union and then turn everyone that lives out there into slaves on our farms. And it's like, yeah, that's just, that won't work. It's like, I don't really think anyone out there would take that lying down, you know? And he kind of made it sound like they would. Like, that's how he made it sound in the book. And it's like, well, obviously that didn't happen in real life. So it's like, I think he was wrong. And also, I think he was kind of wrong about the whole idea about they didn't need to trade with anyone, because it's like, every country needs to trade. That's just how it works. But anyways, with that, it's time for us to move on from that clip and on into our next one, down in Kherson, where we were able to see the 72nd Mechanized Brigade hitting some Russian forces. Look at this.
Oh.
Yeah, Jack Jelly brought this up. Some old school names for that Chinese people gave to.
I wouldn't read those off.
Well, no, actually, Matthew, if you would just allow me to continue. The Chinese names for people who are not Chinese are usually pretty racist, in short. Generally, it's still in the modern day, the Chinese generally call foreigners, specifically Europeans, pretty much the basics barbarians. Like they actually just call them that sometimes in literature. So, you know, like us here in the United States, sometimes they just literally reference us as barbarians. A little bit wild with that. Because I don't think that would ever fly anywhere else in the rest of the world. But moving on from that, and on into our next clip near to Zelensky, we also got to see them hitting some Russian forces. I mean, they got that Buhanka, and they got it twice. And we see another vehicle smoking down the street. And that was the end of the clip, but still very impressive to see. And moving on from that and out of Zelensky and on up into Kyiv, it's now time for us to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1103 of the war. And so without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Українці, українки, повертаємось додому. Як підсумок цих днів, чітка підтримка Європи, більше єдності, ще більше готовності співпрацювати, всі єдині в головному, щоб мир був реальним, потрібні реальні гарантії безпеки. І це позиція всієї нашої Європи, усього континенту. Британія, Європейський Союз, Норвегія, Туреччина. Сьогодні ми скоординували наші позиції, буде багато зустрічей, багато спільної роботи. Найближчими днями, найближчими тижнями буде дипломатія заради миру. І заради того, щоб всі ми були разом. Україна, вся Європа і обов'язково Америка. Звісно, ми усвідомлюємо важливість Америки. І ми вдячні за всю підтримку, яку ми отримали від Сполучених Штатів Америки. Не було такого дня, щоб ми не відчували цієї вдячності, бо це вдячність за збереження нашої незалежності. Наша стійкість в Україні, вона базується на тому, що роблять заради нас і заради власної безпеки наші партнери. Саме мир нам потрібен, а не вічна війна. І саме тому ми кажемо, що гарантії безпеки є ключем до цього. Найближчим часом ми всі у Європі сформуємо наші позиції, наші спільні позиції, лінії, яких ми маємо досягти, і лінії, з яких не можемо відступити. Такі позиції будуть представлені нашим партнерам в Сполучених Штатах Америки. Надійність, тривалість миру, правильна угода про закінчення війни – це дійсно наш спільний пріоритет. І, звісно, я хочу зараз подякувати вам, усім в нашій рідній Україні, хто відчуває, як багато важить єдність і як змінюється історія, і коли мільйони захищають гідність своєї країни. Наші воїни на фронті, всі наші люди, я пишаюся вами, я хочу всім вам подякувати. Дуже дякую вам. Слава Україні!
And Ram
And
Slava.
Hiram Slava. And also, where was he at? Was he on his presidential plane or something?
Yes, he was on the little Airbus A319 right there.
Oh yeah, it was nice. I was thinking the whole time. I was like, wow, where's he at? This is a nice place. He's got like the Ukrainian like emblem on the wall and everything. Looked real executive.
Let me see if I can show this to y'all. The little inside of that Ukrainian A319 here. Let's see here. Geez, where in the world is it? That's not even real.
What the hell is that?
That looks like a digital mock-up that was made by the Russian hitman, so that way they could figure out what was inside the plane. But unfortunately, I don't really think I'll be able to get you an interior view of this Ukrainian A319. But that was probably the best it will ever get them, because I can't find any pictures of it online at all. But I can find these A319s that were outfitted for just, private service, which is pretty nice, actually. That's pretty impressive right there.
Yeah, that is nice right there. It's like if you get to use an A319 as a business jet, that's just next level right there. That's a nice setup.
I have to say that it is a very nice plane. I like to fly in it. Sometimes I like to fly the plane. Not really, I'm not qualified, but still really neat. And we all like the Airbuses. They're just really cool. As opposed to the Boeings that continue to fall out of the sky. And I have no idea why, but they just keep doing it. And they just seem to not stop. Especially the 737 MAX. I always have to bring that up. One of my favorites. Truly my favorite. This is a 737-200 with a little itty-bitty engines. That was what it first came out with. But then they started to give it bigger and bigger engines because they were more fuel efficient. And also, they were quieter. Real quiet. Long-lasting quiet. Like these. Those are the modern jet engines. That's what all of y'all would know. But most importantly, we have to get to the 737 MAX. Because that is the one that is famous. This one. The engines are huge. Freaking huge. Massive. So what they did is that they took the cowling, or more so the nacelle, and they pushed it really forward so that way they could fit the engine where it wouldn't be smacking into the ground and pretty much dragging the balls of the plane every time it was taking off. So what the problem with was that they did not change the autopilot software. And so the engines are so far forward that it changes the entire center of balance of the 737. And so when the pilots would turn on the autopilot would operate understanding that the center of mass was further back to the tail section than towards the force section of the aircraft, meaning that sometimes the autopilot would over adjust and then send the plane into an uncontrolled dive, which would be incredibly hard to recover from, and most of the time the Maxes would crash. At least that's what would happen in their earlier service. They've largely fixed those problems now, but then there are other problems. Real problems. Long-lasting problems. But if you thought I only knew about trains, I know a good deal about airplanes as well. But beyond that, I hope that does address that quite well. Very well. Long-lastingly well. But Matthew, I understand that we have another poll. And can we talk about this poll? What makes this poll special? Why we like the polls?
Yes, we have another poll to get to. But first of all, I want to say a big shout out to Roman Golovka for putting in a $50 donation and helping to bring us up to $7,404 raised on the fundraiser. And huge shout out to Roman for that generosity as well. But jumping into our last poll of the night, this one says the EU committed more aid to Ukraine at today's summit on Sunday, but no new EU alliance was announced. And what are your thoughts? 41% said the EU will stand up very soon, while 31% said the EU is trying to play politics right now to bide their time, and 18% said the EU will never stand up right now. And on this one, this is interesting. I was expecting today there would be a little bit more than what came out, but it turns out that it was a little bit disappointing in my opinion, because they did announce more aid to Ukraine, but it sounds like, I'm with the 31%, the EU is trying to play politics with the United States to basically bide their time until they can basically unify the other European countries with being fully on board. So I'm not really sure how this is going to end, to be honest with you. For America's sake, I hope they stay within our sphere. But at the same time, we can't just abandon Ukraine because otherwise they're going to get taken over by Russia, which is a sworn enemy of the United States, which would also not be in our interest either. So it's just really a catch-22 right now, and only time's going to tell where this is going to go. It's going to be certainly interesting to watch over the next couple of weeks because it's definitely going to be tense for probably weeks to come. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I believe that the European Union might not stand up right now. I would have to say, because if they weren't going to stand up now, I don't think they'll ever have a chance at it again, or at least a moment to really do it and make it make sense, at least for the foreseeable several years from now. Because this was really the moment that, if anything was going to push the Europeans to create a separate sphere, this would be it right here. I honestly say I'm a little bit mixed about it, because honestly, for the United States, it's better that they remain in the sphere, but as far as European and Western security interests go outside of America's, it actually probably would have been better for them to create their own sphere and look out for themselves militarily and economically. So I really can't say that I'm really happy or unhappy with it. I'm honestly down the middle with it. But at the same time, it was a little bit annoying to see that so many European leaders had such strong statements to make, and then none of it was followed through on. But with that, I hope that does.
I think they're trying to play politics, because I think, once again, it's not as simple as simply saying, okay, the EU is unified, we're all together on this issue, and let's just run forward. Of course, Europe is unified to an extent, but even at that, it's still like trying to herd cats, basically, because everybody's got an opinion. All these different countries have a say in the matter. And to get that many countries on board on a single issue and not have any problems whatsoever and have them 100% on board, that's a task and a half, even for Europe when it comes to Ukraine security. So they might be trying to buy some time here by basically trying to float these ideas of like the ceasefire idea that the U.S. proposed. They're trying to float that to buy some time with the United States. That could be the strategy here, but they're dealing with a hell of a situation in Europe right now, just like America's dealing with a hell of a situation as well. So it's really, really tricky.
Yeah, I would say it is a fairly tricky situation, but at the same time, though, if we're talking about herding cats, I mean, honestly, like the Congress is like that, or anything that's a representative body. It's always like that because there's multiple moving parts.
And we get nothing done. We get hardly anything done these days.
Well, I mean, but at the same time, though, if the thing is that usually the Congress isn't all aligned on one thing. All of Europe said that they were aligned on one thing, and then they couldn't even come and pull it through. Actually get it done. So, it's like if everyone's aligned on one thing and they still can't even get it done, when would they ever do that?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say that they can get it done probably, but it's going to take a little bit more time than this, because the whole Ukraine talks falling apart with the United States and Ukraine, that just happened a couple of days ago. So it's still very fresh. So Europe may not be totally ready to jump headfirst into it right now, because they just got very short notice of this, that the U.S. is considering completely pulling out of the situation. So they might be trying to simply buy some more days or buy some more weeks to get everybody on board 100%.
Yeah, hopefully so, because if they're not, I mean, it's like, well, hell, that honestly, at that point, Europe really is as weak and ineffective as some people want to make it out to be. And then it's like, well, what would they do in their own sphere if they ever even had the spine to do it? It's like, would they even have the initiative to actually do anything at that point? Who knows? But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, it's time for us to get on into some interesting and juicy questions. And Greg Keating said, "Are we playing cards? I am not here to play cards. I am not wanting to play cards." But also, have you seen?
I have all the cards: the Charizard, the Charmander, and the Charizard.
Have you seen the memes though that came out about about that exchange in between the two, and they put them in like a room and they got the game of Risk in front of them, and he's saying, "You don't have all the cards, you're risking World War III, millions will die," like, and they're like sitting in front of a Risk table. Let me go see if I can find that real quick. I probably wouldn't be able to find it. That'd probably be too difficult to find. I'm not even going to try. But anyways, with that, Matthew, let's get on to those questions. What do we got?
All right. Also, by the way, Richard Mignarion, he said, we just hit a 7,500 plus raise, which is crazy, by the way. That's a lot. Now, I knew we were going to hit the $7,500 mark tonight, and we sure did. We smashed it. I love to see it. Huge shout out to everybody for donating once again. But also, by the way, huge shout out to Uncle Vampy, who helped bring us up to that figure right there with a $100 donation. And thank you very much, Uncle Vampy, for that support to the fundraiser. And also, we are now moving on to our live chat decoders of the night, while my brain brain has a sudden lapse, like a old brain or something like that. But jumping into our old Morse code decoders right here, old ones. What the hell am I yapping about? But anyways, tonight we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, Dave Millsaps, Heroya Fluffiness, Arabelle Garbo, Joni Dog, and Norm Pritchett. They said the Morse for today says the Russians are soon going to be hearing the sounds of silence in LLT, LLC.
And honestly, I don't even know how y'all got the Morse code message because there was no intro to have a Morse code message.
Yeah,
tonight.
that's right. How the hell did they get that?
I don't know, but if they all got the same thing, I guess you'll hit that den on the nail. I guess you'll get that from another world. I guess you'll get that from a seance. I have no clue because there was no Morse code message tonight. But congratulations to y'all for getting that correct. Y'all got that dead on the money. I don't know how though. That's actually interesting. But still, I hope that this addressed that somewhat well, at least in my opinion. And with that, it's time for us to move on into some actual questions. Matthew, what do we got?
It's rigged. It's rigged. Apparently, they're getting tipped off ahead of time what the Morse code says. We have a rat in our midst. But anyways,
but I'm the only one who knows what the Morse code message is, and I'm not a rat. So how are they getting it?
Well, it was supposed to be a joke, by the way. That wasn't insulting you or something.
No. I was taking that serious. I was like, well, I don't really share that with anyone else. I was like, how the hell would they even get it? I was like, I don't know. I mean, like,
that was an attempt at a joke. But anyways,
Anyways, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Please.
But anyways, jumping into our first question here. This one goes to Wellness LSA Latvia, who says, why are Baltic states not invited on the London meeting?
I don't know. I actually did not know the reason why. I heard that they protested today, but I didn't hear any actual reason as to why they weren't included, considering that they're one of the main groups of countries that would be scared of the Russians. So I actually don't really have a reason why that happened. But something I was thinking? Something that I was thinking? I just saw someone coming in here. Ben Baker said fake news. And it gets so old. It gets so old. Look, another one. Why not Cougar? False news. Now we got a new one, Matthew. It's not fake news. It's false news. How? Please explain. I'd be happy to hear. We'll wait. But beyond that, I always find it Matthew, that's almost like one of those other drug-induced impulses. Saying something like that, like fake news or something like that. Like no explanation. Like no actual no actual disproving, It's like there's nothing like that. It's interesting, But anyways, with that,
one could say it's like a drug-fueled outburst or something like that. For some people, it manifests in moaning, like "oh man." That's some people's outburst. Some people are like "bitch," and then some people are just some people go silent. It manifests itself in different ways. But extremism, it's a doozy. It's something that for some reason it's infested society a lot these days. That people think, oh, I don't like that. Instead of putting my thought forth in a logical way where it makes sense and people might understand what I'm trying to tell them, let me just go out there and start cursing them out at the top of my lungs and going berserk and wishing harm on them. That'll solve it. And it never does. Shocking revelation. Acting like a fool like that never solves anything.
Yeah,
and not only that, but it just causes everybody to delve into chaos even further.
Yeah, like look at this one from Michael. Enforcer is woke liberal propaganda. I remember back before Trump was president and Biden was president, we were called MAGA Nazi Republicans, and now we're called liberal snowflakes. No matter what, because the thing is, Michael, is that I'm not a village idiot like you. I actually have a brain, so I actually think for myself, and I think whether I like something or not, regardless of politically who's in charge. So I end up liking and disliking a lot of actions that all of them take simultaneously. I like some of the things that Biden didn't like others. Like some of the things that Trump will do, don't like others. But the fact of the matter is that I'm not a village idiot like you, who has to go along and just back someone up no matter what, even if that action isn't in my interests. I don't just sit there and just blindly say I love them and everything they do is right. So for people like you just can't even comprehend that. So you immediately go to I'm your enemy. And I'm not even your enemy. I'm just literally saying what I think is within the nation's interest and not. And then you sit there and out of the blue, because I say that your guy isn't really that good, at least in this one action right now that he's doing in foreign policy. I say that's not a good action. I don't really like what he's doing with that. Then out of the blue, I automatically become your enemy because I didn't agree with everything that the guy did, and I didn't worship the ground that he walked on. Like, I'm not one of those people. Like honestly, I think that's more of like a beta snowflake kind of a thing to do, is to just blindly support your elected officials than anything. Because it's like, you don't even have to blindly support them. It's not like they're going to take you out back behind the barn and shoot you if you say you don't don't like what they're doing. I mean, honestly, it'd be better if you disagreed with at least half the things they were doing, because then it at least shows that you have a spine instead of just being a weak-willed bitch that wanders around and lets the people you elected tell you what's going to happen and you're going to like it. Like, that's honestly weaker, in my opinion, than what you're doing. Well, actually, what you're doing is weaker, in my opinion, than what you say I'm doing. It's really lame, honestly. But anyways, with that, now that I've gotten that out of the way, made my peace, they'll probably now come back in here in a drug-induced rant and then go, bitch! Or something like that. So it'll probably happen here in like 5
No
seconds.
offense or anything.
But you've been checked out for Tourette's?
you got this little tick. Bitch.
Oh man, because and also another thing, like it's just crazy how it works. There's been this guy, like no offense and nothing, but have you been checked for Tourette's? There's this guy, because way back in the day, when I first started the YouTube channel, we had a Discord server, and sometimes some of those people in that Discord server would friend me. So this guy who's been Discord messaging me for 3 years at this point has had nothing but good things to say. Just out of the blue today, you know, I'm sitting here working. There's usually a lot of messages that come through. Sadly, I don't really get to see a lot of them. But out of the blue today, it sends in a message. I go look at it, and this guy is sitting there saying, this guy send me a video link to something. I don't click on links. Send me a video link to something. He said, this guy gets it and has his head screwed on, unlike you and what you used to be 3 years ago. And I was like, I don't know. Like honestly, I'll be honest with y'all. If y'all ever hear a recording of what's about to happen, it's probably from what's about to happen right after the stream. Because I don't know where the hell people come from with that kind of disrespect and giving me that kind of a mouth. It's like, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can say that, and I'm fine with it. But you're trying to give me that kind of a mouth and say that my head's not screwed on straight, I'm about to start screwing your head on in a second. You know, it's like, I don't know where the hell people get by thinking they can get away with stuff like that, because like I rarely ever do that unless someone's giving me some sort of heat or acting like an idiot, and then I go and equal their energy. But I never go off the bat and just start going off at people most of the time, unless they're just acting arrogant, stupid, or an asshole off the bat. So I was like, I don't know where the hell this guy is coming from. It's like, on top of that, he's been one of the few people who has had a direct line of contact to me for 3 years, and then wants to start running his mouth at me. I'm like, what the hell? It's like, that's absolutely crazy to me. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat. Well, I hope that puts out some of my opinions. And also, I'd have to say, I think the internet makes a lot of people more free to say stupid stuff that they wouldn't get away with saying in public. Because I can promise you this: if all these Republicans and Democrats who run their mouths like feigning idiots got in a room together, they'd be smacking each other. Well, actually, they do. They go to protests and stuff for no reason. Like, they just wander around and yell in the streets for nothing. Like, they don't change anything. But then they all go out there and act like they're owning each other by getting in fist fights and throwing rocks at each other's heads. So I guess they kind of do that. I guess they revel in it or something. I don't know. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Peace with War, who says, how many countries do you think will join the European alliance to help Ukraine?
Probably a decent amount of them, but that's even if the European alliance happens. I think there's going to be a lot of countries like today that will openly support Ukraine, but I don't think they're going to be creating a separate European alliance, at least for now, at this point, to protect Europe's interests separately from the West as a whole. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you once again for asking such an interesting question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Michael Thomas, who says, niobium seems to be the main rare earth that the U.S. wants from Ukraine. Comment, please.
I don't really know about that specific rare metal, and I also wouldn't know the industrial applications of it, unfortunately, so I'd largely have to declare ignorance on that one. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to, let's see here. This one goes to Gold, who says, is the reasons why Russia used beasts of burden, is it a fuel shortage or a vehicle shortage?
It's largely a vehicle shortage from what we understand, because they passed a decree just yesterday saying that the army can now pretty much just steal vehicles from civilians for military use. So at this point, that seems to be the case, that they're not only running out of fuel, they're also running out of vehicles to use the fuel. So I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right. Our next question here is going to go to, also, let me say good night. My brain's one track tonight. I can only do one thing at a time. But let's see here. Our next question goes to Shadow Skill, who says, what if it's an excuse for them to send in peacekeepers to observe the ceasefire?
And I would doubt that, because sending in peacekeepers without some sort of agreement from the Russian side would be akin to pretty much joining the conflict when the ceasefire ends at that point. So I wouldn't think so. So I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Halligan218, who says, do you think France and the UK are trying to keep things calm, hoping the US admin will reverse course like they have before? I can tell you for a fact, they're hoping for that. And I think that might be part of the like side motivation for biding their time by playing politics. For number one, they're trying to get all the EU countries to unify completely. That's probably the main thing. But they're also in the back of their heads thinking, maybe while we're trying to unify Europe and trying to get them behind our plan, hopefully the US will decide to play fair with Ukraine and start going down the right path. They're probably hoping for that, but they're probably mainly trying to get their countries together. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that's probably what they're doing as well. At least in my opinion, I would think that they're probably trying to wait it out and see if, they make another 180 again in a couple of days, maybe. That would maybe be the best answer I could give for what they're doing right now. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
This one goes to Sheffield Steel, who says, what would the U.S. do if Israel started sharing U.S. technology with Russia?
Who knows? Who knows? They probably. I can't really make a comment on that. I would love to, but I can't, because the answer would be that we probably do nothing. Because they, for some reason, anything that they do, it's fine. I don't know how to explain that, but we probably would do nothing. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Avari Mandabratis, who says, stupid question. No, it's not stupid at all, Avari. He said, how do Ukrainian drone operators avoid hitting civilians in their cars casually driving through a combat zone?
That's an interesting question. I don't really know. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to answer that. I don't really think they conduct drone strikes in those kinds of instances much, and they generally assume that any vehicular traffic that is frequent near to the front lines is most likely military traffic. So there might be some civilian collateral in there. It's just that we've never seen proof of that actually happening. Also, something that I might want to share with y'all, because this might be something that is a little important to share, because, about the question, because some people are going to be going, why would you say that about Israel giving over military tech to the Russians? Well, because it happened. That was what I wasn't really wanting to go in depth on, but I know that some people are going to be bucking and acting like, they're making the situation into what it's not. Let me go show y'all a Chinese aircraft, the J-10, the Chengdu J-10. It's ugly, yes, but believe it or not, this is pretty much a copy, for the large part, of an Israeli F-16. That's actually generally where the Chinese got this from. And if you look through their developmental history, you will see that the Israelis were involved a decent bit in the development of the J-10. They largely did this on their own without any American approval, helping out and supporting the development process of the J-10. And not only that, the Israelis also allowed for the Pythons, which are their version of the AIM-9s, to be copied and produced by the Chinese for the J-10. So in a sense, the J-10 fills a similar role in the Chinese Air Force that the F-16 fills in the U.S. Air Force, because it is pretty much a ripoff of an Israeli F-16, which in short is an American F-16. So I hope that addresses that somewhat well, at least as to why I'd say nothing would happen, because they did that back in the day, back in the late 90s, and we didn't do anything about it. We just kind of ignored it. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And I saw an interesting question here. Excuse me. Goodness, I drank some water and it's got me choking. But I saw an interesting question from Waba from the live chat. He said, we should be more worried about fired government workers selling info to our enemies. And what are your thoughts? And that, Waba, is a very good point. I'm sure that foreign intelligence services are swooping in like hawks on all these fired government workers. And once again, now these government workers, I'm not saying that they were all disloyal, but now they're pissed off because they got laid off in a very abrupt way. So they could be pissed off now. And of course, some of them held security clearances. And I already saw a report that China and Russia have ordered their intelligence services to ramp up recruitment of those fired workers, because they assume, would be logical, those workers are now going to be pissed off and angrier than hell, and they could be more apt to turn against the United States, which is a very bad and risky situation because we can't have our secrets leaking out to our enemies like that. So hopefully the United States is keeping an eye on those workers and not just letting them go around, speaking to random people who could be against U.S. interests. I mean, that could be leaking out our secrets, which would be horrific. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, that might be a genuine security concern, honestly. But we'll just have to wait and see. I'm sure that we'll never know, because anyone who would ever buy a state secret from a fired government employee probably would never have the courtesy of letting the United States know. But that is a big concern, actually, when you think about it. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and also X at treason. Yes, that is treason. But the thing is that if people are pissed off like that and they think that the country screwed them over, and then they think that they're going to get back at the country and screw them over, there's a decent likelihood that that could start to happen in large form throughout all of these fired and government employees, especially if they're very disgruntled, even if it is treason, and they will be punished for it if found. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Philip Fixes LSA, who says, why would we stop offensive cyber operations against Russia as the new sect of defense has chosen to do?
While they're really chill people, they're really cool, and while the Russians will cyber attack us well into the future without stopping, without pause, because they did it under pretty much everyone. They did it under Clinton, they did it under Bush, they did it under Obama, they did it under Trump last time, and they did it under Biden. And this time they're really cool, relatable, really trusty people, and we just love them so much because Russia is just so cool. Have you ever seen like those cool little fonts that they make out of like the Cyrillic alphabet to make things look cool? Let's see, Chernobyl. Let me just type this in. I bet you will find it. Let's see here. Oh, where in the world did they put it? Like the little Russian. Let's see, Russian text font. There we go. Like this. You see that? That's just so cute. It's so cool. Look at that. It makes them look really neat. Like when they put the little red star on the vodka shot glasses, and, they have the AKs and everything. I mean, they're just so cool and, like, neat and mysterious, like Rasputin and everything. I mean, like, who couldn't be friends with the Russians? It's not like they, are genocidal maniacs that, only look out for their own ambitions and interests as far as a nation is concerned. That'd be ridiculous. So we'll hold off on the cyber attacks. We wouldn't want to harm them. But, if they harm us, it'll be fine because, we got to put our interests first. So with that, I hope that does address that well, as sarcastically as I could. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next one here is going to go to, let's see here. I could have sworn I saw one here in the live chat, but I was trying to scroll up to find it, and I don't see it, dang it. But anyways, jumping into our next live chat question from the spreadsheet, this one goes to Zuby. Who says, will Ukraine start attacking animal feed supplies after they are done starving the vehicles for fuel?
I have a feeling that they probably won't, because to be able to attack and cause enough damage to those significantly enough, that might be impossible. Because that feed might be incredibly spread out, or might be in giant warehouses where it would be really hard to figure out where exactly in the warehouse that is to be able to hit it and destroy it. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Kolbs89, who said, I heard the special government employee Musk call for the U.S. to leave NATO and the UN. Honestly, leaving the UN wouldn't be a bad thing, to be straight up. But how likely is that to happen?
Probably might happen. I mean, you never know. I mean, you can't really tell anything with this administration these days. They could do it. They couldn't do it. It could be talk. It could not be talk. Who knows? Like, I hate to tell you, I have no clue, but I find statements like that stupid. It's not within America and the West's interest. So with that, I hope that does address that.
Honestly, like leaving the UN, I would honestly be in favor of that, to be straight up honest, because the UN is useless. But, the UN and NATO are entirely different. The UN has no real, like, effective purpose at this point, at least for American interests. It doesn't, in my opinion. NATO has a humongous, purpose. Like, it's the complete polar opposites. NATO is very useful, and the UN is completely useless. So to lump both of them in the same camp and say just eliminate both of them, that's just silly. NATO should stay around without a doubt. Like, there's no question about that. There's not an inkling, in my opinion, that thinks that NATO should go away. I'm 100% for NATO. In fact, 110% for it. So, me personally, though, I wonder how many people in the chat would like to see us withdraw from the UN. Obviously not NATO, but the UN. That might be a good poll.
Yeah, I would say so. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And let's see here. Our next one is going to go to Mick, who said, could a ceasefire proposal be for European troops to enter Ukraine without being fired upon?
Most likely not, because the Russians just still wouldn't accept it even during the ceasefire, and the active conflict would still be going on during that ceasefire because it's only an air and naval ceasefire. It's not a ground ceasefire. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. So our next one here goes to Lurk, who says, why do you think the UK or France have any more right to dictate what Ukraine should do regarding a ceasefire? They don't want it, and it's off the table, in my opinion.
Well, they aren't dictating to him. They asked him if they wanted to, and they said no, and that was that. So that question doesn't really, I really can't answer that question because that's not what happened. So I hope that does address that somewhat well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. And also to clarify, by the way, I did not say leave NATO. I'm not in favor of leaving NATO. I'm talking about leaving the UN, the United Nations, just to clarify that. Some people got confused. But anyways, jumping into our next one here, this one goes to Ben Barker, who says, in your opinion, what does a victory for Ukraine look like, and how did the Ukrainians get there?
Victory for Ukraine will look like some of the territories being reclaimed, specifically Kherson and Zaporizhia, if any, and also ensuring that the state of Ukraine remains economically independent from the Russian Federation, politically independent from the Russian Federation, and eventually somehow gets into some sort of security assurances provided by the West or NATO. The only way for them to get to that is continue the war and continue to beat the Russians down until eventually they relent and give in to those demands. That's really the only way to get to that point. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next one here goes to, let's see here. This one goes to Mitchell Hatmaker, who says, what are you guys' thoughts on the mineral deal, specifically if it would bring long-lasting peace for Ukraine or not?
It probably wouldn't bring long-lasting peace, because if we were going to make a giant stink out about Ukraine getting security assurances for signing the deal, that means we have no plans of ever really giving them security assurances, because an anonymous just threw in a $500 donation. Holy moly! But beyond that, the thing is that for Ukraine to get security assurances, if American businesses being there was security assurances enough, why in the world is the president so offended that Zelensky asked to have security assurances actually written down into the mineral deal? That wouldn't have been too much to ask, right? Because, I mean, pretty much he's already saying security assurances are included, so why not just actually put that specifically in writing? That's because we never planned on giving them security assurances. We were just going to take the minerals and not provide them any sort of security in exchange. And anyways, the way the United States is probably looking at it, or the way the president is looking at it, is it's fine if the Russians invade them later and take it over. We'll just make a deal with the Russians to extract the minerals from the land that they now control, and then we'll still get it anyways. So that's probably what was going to be going on with that. So I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to AF Kaplan, who says, there have been reports of the U.S. government wanting to reestablish the Nord Stream 2, and do you think the U.S. will lift Russian sanctions to do it?
I would say maybe that's possible, because we're also hearing that apparently nonstop flights from Russia to the United States might begin again here in the future. That might be possible, but one thing I find very interesting is that this very same president told the Germans that they shouldn't be working on the Nord Stream at all because it makes them economically connected to the Russians, and so now he's going to be floating the idea of reopening the Nord Stream for the Germans. It's like that's literally just doing a 180 from what he originally said the first time he was in office. It doesn't even make any sense.
I tell you, it doesn't make any sense at all. That was the sound of frustration right there, by the way. I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. It can be a very hard line position on one thing one day, and then all of a sudden, I never said that was never for that. Reopen it. It's the right thing to do. Honestly, I think the whole situation was stopping the cyber warfare attacks on Russia. That is like, I think that's being viewed as the olive branch, like the olive branch being extended to Russia by the United States. That's the purpose behind it. But reopening the Nord Stream, that's way more than an olive branch. That's giving Russia a way to generate mass amounts of revenue again, which is what we do not want them to do, because once again, they'll rebuild their military stocks and they'll be right back to the point they were before they invaded Ukraine, which is what emboldened them in the first place to actually go in and do what they did. So it's just tough. It's tough while I get rid of this bot right here, but it's just interesting to predict this.
No, you got him. Yeah, I saw that. But go ahead.
I was just wrapping it up right there.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done. Because you were saying you're banning that person. You took like a 1 second pause, and I was like, it's my time. But
My brain's not at full speed tonight for some reason. I don't know why. I drank good coffee tonight, but for some reason my brain's one track. Like whenever I like type something or look at something, it just like eliminates my whole line of thought. But go ahead.
I didn't have any coffee tonight because we were out of coffee for me. So someone came in. Here's the next one, y'all. Just to reach y'all off what the haters say, just so that we all know. Because I remember back in the day, I got to remind you all this. Back in the day before Trump was president, back when it was Biden, we used to be called Republican Nazis for what we would say on this channel. Same thing. We've always been saying it. Never really changed. The exact same like thoughts, ideas, stuff like that. And we either agree or disagree with people based on them. So now someone came in and said you're a bleeding libtard. Like it's literally just all across the board. Like you're either a Republican or a liberal, but regardless, people hate you because you have your own thoughts. Like sorry, I'm not like stupid like you and can't formulate my own thoughts. It's very unfortunate, I suppose, that I can actually think for myself and you just kind of follow along with whatever people tell you. So anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right. And let's see here. Our next one goes to Magellan, who says all of these ceasefire advantages are in favor of Russia. So why would the UK and France even propose it?
It would probably just to try and appease the U.S. government in some way. But I'll be honest, it just didn't really make a lot of sense. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to, let's see here, Sheffield Steel once more, UK that is. They said technology sharing is the main reason Turkey can't have the F-35. So what's different about Israel?
Well, that's something we really cannot touch on. It's something that we like. It's just really hard to touch on without certain things being said. It's just something impossible to answer, to be entirely honest with you. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next one goes to, let's see here. This one goes to Melinda Griffith Vaughn, who says, do you think it is because they're trying to preserve the NATO alliance? And basically, this is a breather to make sure of U.S. actions and make sure they're sure about it.
Maybe so, but still, it would largely still benefit the Russians. And I would get why the Ukrainians wouldn't agree to that kind of a ceasefire arrangement. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Brian Gonzalez, who says, did you know that France is the only nation whose nuclear doctrine includes a warning shot? And this is one reason I prefer France at the head of the new NATO.
It's a little bit interesting that they do a warning shot. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I don't really understand the French rules of engagement on everything because they kind of make it a little bit complicated. Like if there are several hundred Russian nuclear weapons flying into Europe, is it really time for a warning shot, or is it time to let the whole thing loose? It's like that's kind of my thing with that. If you're in a nuclear exchange like that where you're firing a strategic nuclear weapon, there probably isn't room for a warning shot. You pretty much just have to let it all loose at one go. So I hope that addresses that well. Like it's neat that they have that, and it's nice to know that they would want to still make an extra escalatory step. But at that point, with the kind of weapons you're using, there really are no escalatory steps yet left. You pretty much just have to send them all on their way and pray that they hit their targets. But I hope that does address that well. Also, I see that someone may have accidentally been misinterpreted. I believe they were one of the people who said fake news. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or realistic. I mean, a lot of people come in here and unironically say fake news. So if you were one of those people and I said, look at that, it's like the outburst, like we have no clue to tell. Like there's no JK or I'm just kidding, anything like that with it. So it just looks like what it is and we take it at face value. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Philip Fix's LSA once again. And they said, would an air ceasefire include POV drones, or would you consider them artillery-like support?
I would say the drones are more so artillery support at this point, almost like light mortars or medium mortars, and some of the larger ones like the Baba Yagas, they can almost count for heavy artillery support like a 155 millimeter main gun. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, by the way, believe it or not, we've gone through about 30. Let's see here. Let's see. Hold on. Let me see. Let's see. Okay, never mind. But anyways, we've gone through almost 30 live chat questions tonight, which is a hell of a lot. That's a huge amount actually on our fundraiser night. I think that's because we got started so early. We've had time to get to a ton of them. So we have one left, but we also have a few minutes left as well because we usually round out the fundraiser at 11:30. So it's been a long time since we've had a hood review. I'm not sure exactly where we should have our hood review this time. But maybe we can get some ideas from the chat as to what place we should do a hood review on before we get to our final question of the night. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for ideas from the chat about the hood review, we're going to address the poll that I almost forgot about. It says, do you support the U.S. leaving the UN, but not NATO? It looks like 62% said no, while 38% said yes. So actually, a decent amount of people, the majority, say we should not be leaving the UN. Me personally, I don't have a very positive view of the UN. It seems very useless, and it allows countries like North Korea to show up and spew propaganda, and they don't show up with any semblance of really wanting to actually talk in good faith. It's just a way for them to come up and babble and also spew hatred across the world stage. Of course, I know there's the UN Security Council, but of course the veto power and with Russia sitting on that makes it really, really hard to actually make anything happen when it comes to holding these countries accountable. So I don't know. To me, it seems useless, but it looks like the majority disagrees. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I actually would be in the minority. I think the United Nations is largely useless as an organization and a forum. And beyond us just being able to veto stuff in it, it really doesn't do much. And the UN doesn't really amount to much good in the world and actually resolving issues or maintaining peace. So in my opinion, I would say that I'm fine if the United States withdrew from the United Nations, but withdrawing from NATO is an absolutely horrendous idea. That is a terrible idea for the U.S. standing in the world strategically. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And I suppose, because I'm not really seeing like any exact places, at least at this point, because
Let's see.
Go ahead.
So I'm seeing some people say. So here's some ideas, just shouting them out. Someone said Long Beach, California. Someone said Zurich. Zurich might be interesting. I think is that in Switzerland, by the way? Zurich.
Yeah, that's not really going to be a hood. Like we're actually looking for a hood. like that's like a nice city.
I mean, that's a nice hood there. I mean, I wouldn't mind going and visiting that hood sometimes. But let's see here. I'm not seeing any like you were saying. I'm not seeing really any necessarily hoods showing up here. Like the idea of a hood to some people is quite interesting. Some of these places are extremely nice actually, but. Enforcer, are you seeing any hoods? I'm seeing a lot of nice places, but no hoods.
Man, sometimes we'll say, give us a hood, give us a real rough place to grow up. And someone will say, the Beverly Hills. And they'll be like, no, it's no, that's not a rough place to grow up. That's actually a good place to grow up. But
when I grew up, I used to have a Ferrari as a beater. That thing was just nasty.
When I was growing up, my parents didn't treat me well. I had a Glock in my Rari and that was it. It was terrible. But let's go to Hellman Street. That's got to be hell, right? Nah, damn it. It's a all right place. Well, this isn't a hood.
This is where the mayonnaise founder came from.
Really?
No, not really, but you said Hellman, so it made me think about it.
I didn't even make 2 and 2 click right there. If I had heard you say that and actually had my brain clicking, I would have thought, oh, he's making fun of the street name. But sadly, I don't think someone said Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is a hood classic. Now, that is where the hood's at. So let's go up to Philly. And specifically Kensington, because that's where the hood really is. So let's drop down there, and what do we have? Oh yeah, this is the hood. This is it.
Hey, look at that car right there. There's an Escalade right there parked on the street.
Where?
Over there on the right, that pink Escalade. You don't see it? It was right there.
This one?
Look at that. Yeah, it's got tweeters and woofers and everything.
It's got the rims, the woofers. I mean, this really is the hood. It really is. Look, buildings demolished and nothing built in their place. This is it.
I bet that's valuable land right there. That's literally on the main street.
Prime real estate. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
People repairing their cars in the middle of the street. I swear that if you look further down the street, you can see someone stripping the copper out of an AC unit, but I can't really tell for sure. But beyond that, Kensington and Philadelphia is quite literally, no joke, the worst place I've ever seen. It beats Detroit as far as the real hood reviews used to go back in the day. When we really used to look at hoods instead of just kind of like cities, this has always been a rough place every single time we've looked at it. And it still is, honestly. It's just horrendous. I feel sorry for the people who have to live here because it's got to be just literally hell. So very unfortunate for them, but it does give us a bit of a laugh sometimes. Like when there was what was it, Matthew? The biggie bag with something else.
Yeah, I think that was in Detroit. They had the biggie bag at Wendy's for $5. It turns out that's actually a national thing, by the way. I didn't know that was actually a thing, like at Wendy's. But I saw it on our billboard here locally. I was like, oh, that's weird. Apparently, that's like a franchise thing or something like that. It wasn't like a unique meal, but interesting.
Very interesting for sure, I'd have to say. But beyond that, I hope you all enjoyed that little look at a hood, specifically Kensington and Philadelphia. But it's time for us to move on into the last question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who put in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one goes to Mitchell Hatmaker, who says, do you guys think that Syria will become more pro-Western or pro-Russian, and China and Iran? And also, do you guys think that there will be U.S. involvement in Syria in the future, kind of like Iraq?
I think there's certainly going to be a move by the Syrian government to become more pro-Iranian and Russian, because it looks like they're going to start setting themselves up to be some sort of an extremist government or an extremist Islamic republic. So it is guaranteed at this point they're most likely going to be moving in that direction. I honestly think it would be a mistake for the United States to not get involved in shaping Syria in such a key moment in time as this, because we could actually see that there is some stability brought to the region that isn't attempted by a religious fanatic, which it just wouldn't work. So hopefully we will be able to see something like that here in the future, some limited U.S. involvement. But to be entirely honest, I don't think we'll be seeing it right now under the current administration. I don't really know what their foreign policy plan is. I have no clue. But it certainly wouldn't be getting involved in Syria and trying to make sure to keep things running well. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I got to thank all of you so much once again for watching. Over the course of 2.5 hours, we've had 60,000 people here, and at the peak of the stream, there was 10.2 thousand people here. I got to thank each and every one of y'all so much once again for watching tonight, and if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to see people join in our channel, because we are an army of people, 338,415 strong. And so with that, thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
All right, and also thank you all for joining us once again tonight on March the 2nd on this Sunday, and once again helping to raise over $8,000, which is whopping. That is several times higher than the goal that we had set. So huge shout out to LSA for making that happen, and once again coming through strong to help support those who are victims of the war in Ukraine, of course. But with that, folks, we'll see you all on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and also maybe midday tomorrow as well in a short war video if there is enough news to cover. But in the meantime, huge shout out to the 60,000 people that were here tonight and the 3,100 folks that smack the like button. So thank you all once again for joining us. And of course, Slava Ukraine, Hero Slava, get some rest and good night.
To